Many chess players has problems with d4. Like when the opponent plays e4, they're fine, but d4 is the issue. So I'm going to teach you guys how to play against this. You could just play d5. There's the Queen's Gambit. There's the London system that everybody plays. If you see the London, just go knight to f6, and then after e3, you play c5. We're always going to be playing c5. Now, after let's say knight f3, we go knight c6, pawn c3, we go e6. Yes, we're blocking in the bishop. And after bishop to d3, we go bishop d6. If they take, we take back. The plan is to play e5. A lot of persons are going to pull their bishop back to g3. And here you could just get your king out the center of the board. And then once they get their king out the center, you play queen e7 because the plan is to play e5. So, for example, if knight d2, you play e5, they take, you take. There's usually a lot of trades that happens here, and then the knight goes to f3 and attack the queen. Just pull the queen back to e7. The plan is to play bishop g4 and pin the knight. And if they play pawn to h3, just play b6 and put your bishop on b7. After this, the plan is to play rook d8, rook e8, knight e4, and you have a very nice game. Now, apart from just the London, they may play the Joe Bava London. If they play this, still play knight f6, still play pawn c5, and then after e3, we're still going to be taking on d4. Well, in the London, we don't take on d4 this early, but in the Joe Bava London, we take on d4 because this pawn is not on c3 guarding d4. Now, if they take, we must play a6 so that way we prevent their knight from going to b5. And usually after this, there's knight f3, and then you play knight c6. Now, the main theoretical move for white is to play knight to e5, followed by bishop to e2. But nobody's going to be playing these lines. If they do it, though, this is what you should play as black, and then play e6, rook c8, h6, bishop e7, and castle. However, most people in this position play bishop d3, which is a mistake, because now we're able to play bishop g4, pin the knight, which is the main defender of the pawn. And again, a lot of persons just play h3, try to chase away the bishop. You get rid of the knight, take the free pawn on d4, hit the queen, and this is not just going to be winning for you. If he moves the queen, pull it back, you're threatening a fork, black is fine. And if they decide to play the queen's gambit, you could just play the Slav defense. And obviously, if they take, you take back, and from here, it's just development. But let's say knight c3, you play knight f6, knight f3, you play e6, and again, we are blocking in this bishop, but the plan is very simple. So pawn e3, in this position, let's say we go bishop d6, bishop to d3, we castle the king, they castle the king. And one thing I like to do is whenever people play bishop e2 or bishop d3, that's when I take on c4. Because after they take and we play knight d7, it's very easy for us to develop our light squared bishop. For example, there's two plans in this position. So let's say just a regular move like rook to e1. The first way to get our light squared bishop in the game is to play e5. And if they take, we take, and then it's very easy for a bishop to join the game. Another way to get to our bishop in the game is to play b5. And then once the bishop move, we play bishop b7. And the plan is to play c5 and put our bishop on this very long diagonal. We have to be careful though. We don't want to play c5 and lose the b pawn. So let's say they play a3 to prevent b4. We play a6 and then we play pawn to c5. And now if you look on the position, all our pieces are very active. So if you're someone who struggles to play against d4, I want you to watch this full video. I want you to apply all the stuff that I teach and watch your ratings go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to beat these d4 openings. Like, it doesn't matter what d4 opening they play, how to beat them. So I like to play d5. If they play c4, I play c6. Any other weird move, let's just play knight f6. It's the universal move to prepare for their next move. So for example, now if he plays c4, we play c6. He didn't play c4, so we're going to play c5 and then target his pawn. And then we're going to be going for the same setup that we used to play against the London, the Joe Bava London, the Kohli system. For example, this guy's playing the Kohli system. We play knight to c6 with the idea of playing e6, bishop d6, castle the king, and then play e5. Okay, pawn c4 is definitely interesting. We don't necessarily need to take any of these pawns though. Let's just play e6, guarding our pawn. And from here, we're just trying to finish our development. Bishop d6, castle the king. He plays b3. Now we're going to go bishop to d6, get the king out the center of the board. And we also want to see if this is a real 500 or a fake 500. And by the way, guys, if you're 500 and you just play, and somebody calls you a fake 500, just take it as a compliment. It's I just think 500 players are very strong, but they just make the stupidest blunder. And it's the same thing with 600 blunders or 600 players, but their blunder is just less stupid than 500. And it's the same thing with 700, but then their blunder is just less stupid, you know? So I think that's the case. But this guy's developing very well. And usually I like to play queen to e7 followed by pawn e5. I can't play e5 now though because I may lose my d pawn. So I'm just getting the pieces off the back rank basically. I could go rook d8, bishop d7, rook c8, and then once I successfully move all my pieces, then it's gonna be way easier for me to attack. Like I'm teaching some students, and it's sometimes I have to really convince them, bro, you already moved that piece. Do not move that piece again. It's very important that you don't move the same pieces more than once in the opening. And that's a nice move though, because if I pull my bishop back, I think he's just going to take. But let's pull the bishop back. If he takes and I play queen takes, bishop to a3 is actually a tactic that wins my rook, which means if he takes, I have to play h6 first and attack his knight. And then when he moves the knight, that's when I'm going to take. Okay, pawn takes d5. This is good for us, by the way, because once I play e takes d5, my bishop gets free development. Now, what he could do is to take on c5, and obviously, if queen takes, bishop a3 wins the exchange. But he could take on c5 and said, hey, you have an isolated pawn, which it looks like that's what he's doing. Now, I could play a6, but I think he wants to put the knight on d4 anyways. So let's just use the time to finish our development. And I'm also trying to set up some very nice tactical ideas. Okay, knight went back to d4. If I takes, he's going to play pawn takes. Guy's playing some chess, by the way. This guy's playing some chess. All right, now we can take back the pawn on c5 because bishop a3 doesn't work now. Not sure why he pulls the knight back to c2, to be honest. Okay, I know why. He's trying to play bishop to a3. That's why. All right, so let's say we take. I'm trying to get my queen on this diagonal. I want to be a bit slick with it though. That's the thing. I don't want it to be too obvious. So let me start with this move b5 so that way I'm just not worried about bishop a3. Like if he puts his bishop on a3, I just hit him with b4 and he has to move the bishop again. But I kind of want to put my queen on d6 and then threaten a checkmate on h2. And the knight being the only piece guarding the mate, I'm going to eliminate the knight and then checkmate him. So he plays a4. Let's continue with the plan. Pawn to b4. Now the bishop is just never going to a3. Bishop b2. That's a very nice move. It applies a lot of pressure to the knight. Now we're going to pull the queen back to d6. Because for one, it looks like it guards the knight, but it is threatening this that we spoke of. But the guy's been playing some chess, to be honest. I don't think he's going to fall for this. But I guess that's why he's 500. I told you guys. It's like everybody falls for different blunders, you know? But as what we discussed, the knight guards the mate. We eliminate the knight. Now we are attacking the queen and we are threatening a checkmate. So he's actually forced to defend against the checkmate. He didn't save the queen. He didn't defend against the checkmate. I tell you, 500s. That's just a checkmate. We beat more d4 against 600 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 600. Let's speed up some more d4 opening. We're seeing some London system. Most persons who play d4 are going to be playing the London, so ensure that you know how to beat this. Now, after I put the knight on f6, I play c5 to target their center. And then the purpose of moving the c pawn is so this queen becomes very flexible, and we want to attack their center. After c3, I'm going to play the move knight to c6 just to develop my knight. And then from here, we're going to play e6, bishop d6, and castle just to finish our development. And yes, we are blocking in the light squared bishop. There's different plans for the light squared bishop because getting the light squared bishop out too early, it could make this pin even more annoying. Like if the pin gets too annoying, we can always go bishop d7, but we also want to keep b7 guarded. So knight e5 hits the knight. Let's just continue to develop. He's moving the same pieces more than once in the opening, but that's fine. We're just going to be developing. Ooh, pawn to g4. Pawn to g4 is a nice little idea. Now, I'm not afraid of that kingside attack that he's trying to go for. I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board anyways, because his king is going to be staying in the center. And then he plays pawn to g5, like he's really trying to attack me. But here's what I'm going to do now, especially since my king is safe. Instead of moving the knight, I'm going to take on e5. Because if I take on e5 and he still takes my knight, I take with the bishop and I win a pawn. But if I take on e5 and he takes with the bishop, I take again. If he takes, I'm going to always pull the knight back to d7 and then attack the pawn on e5. And this is just a very nice structure to have. So let's just take on e5. If he decides to take with the pawn, though, then knight e7, and there's no way to defend his pawn, which is what he did, which means once I pull the knight back to e7, I'm basically attacking the pawn on e5 twice. He's only guarding it once, but there's just no way to add additional defense to that pawn. Okay, queen to h5 was played. Okay, doesn't really do much though, to be honest. I mean, maybe he wants to put the bishop on d3 to threaten mate. But even though my knight covers the square, at that point I can always play g6. So we're now just ahead by a pawn. 10 moves playing against London. This is how I want you guys to beat that London system. Okay, he plays pawn to g6. I mean, he's trying to be very creative though, because now there's two pieces attacking my knight and he's threatening mate. But first of all, if I just take the free pawn, his queen is going to be under attack. I could also take with the knight, but I'm going to choose. Actually, I'm going to take with the f pawn. Usually you should take towards the center, but I'm going to choose to take with the f pawn. For one, I'm ahead by 2 pawns. Two, his king is in the center, so I'm trying to open as many lines as possible. Once he moves the queen, I'm also thinking of playing d4, because remember, if someone's king is in the center of the board, your goal is to open the center. So if d4 takes, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop takes, knight f3 hits the bishop and the queen and the king. And then once he moves the king, we just get back the bishop and we're doing fine. So let's just play pawn to d4. And especially since we're ahead by 2 pawns, like there's nothing wrong, there's no harm in just trading queens. So he took, oh, wait. By taking on d4, left the bishop unprotected though. So I could also take the bishop, but then at that point, he's going to take my knight, and then queen h4, and then after queen h4, threaten f2, and he guards f2, I play knight e5 and attack f3. So rook takes f4 is what I'm going to play. Remember how the drawback principle worked. The knight was guarding the bishop, no longer guards the bishop. And by the way, guys, if once he takes my pawn, I can trade the queens, and then I can take the free pawn on e5. I could also trade the queens and then just take on f2. Like both of those are completely winning. I'm just choosing to keep the queens on the board. I prefer you guys to get the queens off the board, though, to be honest, because some of you guys' endgame skills aren't really good. All right, he played queen to d2. He also didn't even decide to take back my knight. He decided to attack my unprotected rook instead. But he blundered his queen because my knight is so close to his king. The queen no longer guards f3. Knight to f3 is just a fork. Because now he has to move the king, we grab the queen, and now we win the game. So he moves the queen, the king. Let's grab the queen, take the free pawn on d4. And then from here, I'm just trying to set up some checkmates. Especially if he takes back, it's going to be a bit easier for me. So he plays pawn c4 instead. Now I'm going to play e5 so that way my bishop is able to be developed. Bishop to g2, okay. Um, Before I play bishop g4, let's play queen to h4. Because remember we said when it comes to attacking someone's king, we want to attack the pawns and the squares around their king. So his f2 pawn is not one of his weakest pawns. He saw it. He saw it. He defended against it. And now I want to play pawn to d3. It sacrifices a pawn, not expecting him to take. But if he takes, it makes it easier for me to get both my light squared bishop and my rook in the game. And if I'm playing with all my pieces in the game, plus I have a queen that he doesn't have, then it's going to lead to a checkmate. So king takes, we check on f5 first. Bishop e4, do I have 1, 2, 3 pieces covering that square? He only has two. So once I take on e4, that's just a free piece, bro. I mean, the knight could take, but my rook is just going to take back. Before I even take the knight, let's play rook to d8 check, just to ensure that every one of our pieces are playing. And then once the king move, but the opponent resigns, we'll be more d4 opening against 700 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 700, and I'm still going to be showing you guys how to play against d4. A lot of players has been saying that they're not sure what to do when the opponent plays d4, and now we're seeing a London system, so it's good because I'm going to be able to show you guys how we play against the London. And basically what I do is just I focus on developing my king side pieces as quickly as I possibly can. Now, there's this move pawn to c5 that is very important. It attacks the opponent's center. It allows the queen to be freely developed. And taking on c5 is not really a free pawn. I can check, take back the pawn. I can play e6. Pawn to c3. Now I'll play knight c6. So basically, one important thing when it comes to playing against d4 is moving your c pawn. Like you always have to move the c pawn because it's very important that your queen is able to be activated that way. Now knight to d2 was played, and I'm going to play the move pawn to e6 here. I'm also going to play this move knowing that I'm blocking out my bishop, but I usually don't like to get the bishop out then play e6 because sometimes moves like queen to b3, could be very annoying, and then your bishop is not there guarding the pawn, and now you have to play queen b6. You're not going to lose because of that though, but the setup that I'm teaching you guys just is just going to make it easier. So pawn e6, we play bishop to d6. Again, we're trying to focus on the development of our kingside pieces first, even though we play pawn c5, knight c6, and then we're just going to get castled. So he traded bishops. Let's just take back. Bishop to b5 pins my knight. Now I simply get my king out the center of the board. And from here, it's just a matter of finishing my development. Like to finish my development, I can always go bishop to d7, support my knight, chase away the bishop out of my half of the board. And it's just going to be chess. So he castled the king. Now I play bishop to d7. And as you can see, 9 moves in, I already managed to connect my rooks. And that should always be your goal. Once you're able to successfully connect your rooks, which means you have your rooks looking towards each other, it's a sign that you've completed your development and you've done it correctly. All right, pawn c4, I'm seeing, he's attacking my center, not really doing much. Everything is already guarded. So what I'm going to do is use the principle of neutralization. Knowing that this bishop is on my half of the board, I'm going to play the move pawn to a6, chasing this bishop out of my half. Okay, he took on c5, that's like offense is the best defense because I'm not able to take his bishop because my queen is under attack. But that's fine. Let's just take back the pawn. Eventually, he's going to be forced to move his bishop. Even if he plays knight b3 and attack my queen, which is a nice move because it forces me to move my queen, he still has to eventually either move away his bishop or do what he just did, which is giving up his bishop for a knight. Now, I have a lot of ways to take back the bishop, like a lot of ways. I'm going to choose to take with the bishop here. I could have also took with the pawn and opened the file for my king, for my rook, but taking with the bishop here is also fine because if I'm able to take on c4, then the bishop gets a long diagonal. Now, I want you guys to notice that my rooks are just pointing towards their own pawns, so I need to improve my rook. My opponent just played rook to e1 though, and it did blunder a pawn because if you notice, I now have my queen and my pawn attacking c4. He's only have his knight guarding c4. So once I play pawn takes e4, that's a pawn, bro. Pawn to e4, okay, guess he's trying to maintain some control over the center. Maybe he's trying to play pawn to e5 and attack my knight. These are the positions that you guys go wrong where there's no immediate way to win the game and the opponent is not attacking anything. Once you find yourself in these types of scenarios, just find the piece that's not doing anything and improve it. For example, even though the rooks are connected, that's good. We still need to ensure that we give the rooks open file. So now I'm going to play the move rook f to d8, putting the rook on an open file. I'm also putting the rook on the same line as his queen, which means the knight on d2 is now pinned. What do we know about pin pieces? They do not protect. Okay, rook to c1 was played, and because pin pieces don't protect, the next move that I'm gonna play here is a no-brainer. Knight is not necessarily guarding e4 because it's pinned, which means I have 2 attackers on e4. He technically only has 1 defender, which means once I hit him with knight takes e4, knight can't take, I'll take the queen. And if he plays rook takes, I take the rook. Knight still can't take because, okay, I'll take the queen, and it will come with check, which means it's still not good, but the knight will be attacking my queen at that point. He's also not really able to take on c4, which is what he did because he has, well, he had the 2 attackers, but I saw this. Another thing that I wanted to mention to you guys was my queen and my knight was also targeting the pawn on f2, and because of that, the game is basically over. And that's because I'm now going to play the move queen takes f2 with check. And it's not only that, I'm now applying even more pressure to his knight on d2. It's more pp on the pp. Because now I'm attacking this knight 1, 2, 3 times. He's only guarding the knight 1, two times, which means once I play the move knight takes e2, that's just a free knight. All right, so rook to e2 was played. That's not a bad move because he's basically forking my queen and my knight. There's a lot of different ways to get out of this, but the most well, I could take his knight, right? And it pins his rook to his queen, which means if he takes my queen, I take his queen. So that's already me winning an additional knight. Another thing I noticed that I could do is I could use my knight and take his rook. If I use my knight and take his rook and then he still decides to take my queen, then I'm just going to take his queen. And at that point, he may need to sack his queen. And then when I take back, then he takes. And if I check his king, he pulls the knight back to g1. So with that being said, I'm going to choose to play the move bishop takes f3, trying to win his queen. Now I'm ahead by two pieces. I don't care if he takes my queen because he's gonna lose his queen. I'm also threatening all sorts of checkmates here. Okay, he decided to not take my queen, but take my knight instead. So that's kind of tricky. That's kind of no, not tricky, but it's weird. Like I'm actually not gonna take his queen. It's actually best if I use my rook and then take his rook because at that point, nah, never mind. I'm nah, that's bad. This is jolly a checkmate, guys. Like queen takes g2 is a checkmate, but that's also just a checkmate. We're beating more d4 openings against 800 level players. Stick around. Opponent is now 800. Let's beat some more d4 openings. Now we're seeing a London system. We know what to do against the London though, just knight f6, pawn c5, and once they play something like c3, just continue to develop normally. Remember, what we talk about in the London is it's very important that you move the pawn from c7 to c5. Either, it doesn't matter if you play the regular London or the Jobava London. And then from here, we're just going to finish the development of our pieces. Bishop d3, we go bishop d6. And yes, I did not choose to develop my bishop first. I choose to block the bishop out because there's many ways to get that bishop back in the game. So to take is a mistake. He didn't take. He pulled his bishop back to g3 first. Let's get the king out the center of the board. And then after this move, knight to f3, we play queen to e7. And the whole point of this move is to be able to play the move pawn to e5. So because his knight jump in to e5, I'm going to use the time to play knight to d7 because I'm just trying to get this knight out of my half of the board. Now, there's actually a very, very, very nice tactic in this position, and it's usually when they take, but that was just bad. He castled his king. Didn't see my last move. My last move was applying pressure to e5, which means I'm now attacking e5 one, two, three times. He's guarding e5 one, two times, but it's actually very tricky. It's very tricky. I'm actually not gonna take with the knight first. I'm gonna take with the bishop because if I take with the knight takes and then takes, bishop takes, he's able to sack his bishop and then play queen h5 and then pick up back the bishop. So I have to be on the lookout for that. So let's play bishop takes c5, and regardless of how we play e takes back, we play knight takes. Oh, sure, he's still able to sack the damn bishop though. He's able to sack the bishop. It's not the end of the world though, and personally, I don't think he's gonna sack the bishop. The guy's 800. But what he needs to do is need to sack the bishop. Once I take, he plays queen check, and then once I pull my king back, then he takes. But he didn't sack the bishop. So with that being said, my knight is under attack twice. Do we take his knight or his bishop? No brainer. Actually, yeah, let's just take the bishop. Bishops are better than knights. Queen takes, we're also ahead by a pawn. And from here, it's just a matter of completing our development. So let's play pawn b6, bishop e7. Let's swing our rooks to the open file and just enjoy a regular chess game. So rook e1. Looks like he wants to play pawn to e4. Let's play bishop to b7. If he plays pawn to e4, I'm going to take it actually because my bishop or my pawn is in the way of my bishop. So once I take and he takes back, my bishop is now just going to be on a very nice diagonal. And I'm opening the d file for my rook. Okay, queen takes was played, but what he missed was the fact that he's actively putting his queen on the same line as my bishop, though. Like, whenever this happened, there should be an alarm that goes off in your head. Definitely have a tactic here. Not something to win, but to destroy his king side by playing this move, knight to d4. And all I'm doing is moving my knight out the way because my bishop attacks his queen. He still needs to be careful where he puts his queen though, because if he does not protect the c2 square, then knight c2 is just going to be a fork and, we're just going to win the game. Okay, so the queen went back to d3, which means he's keeping the defense on his c2 square. Let's take on f3 with check, and he's not forced to double his pawns, by the way. And this is opposite colored, by the way. So opposite colored bishop doesn't necessarily mean it's drawn when we're in the end game. It means the player who is attacking is playing with an extra piece. But let's start by playing rook to d8. I mean, Rooks needs files. We gain the tempo on the queen. The queen is the only defender of the f3 pawn. So if he moves his queen away too far, then he's just going to be losing the pawn on f3. Okay, queen to e2. Good move. Now I'm going to play queen to f6 because now I notice I'm now attacking this pawn two times. He's only guarding it once. So he needs to find some creative ways to add defense to the pawn. Maybe push it, but then if he push it, my bishop just becomes so strong, pointing towards his king. And if he plays king to g2, he's pinning the pawn, and I may consider playing g5 followed by g4. So I really like my position here. So he did push the pawn to f4. And okay, from here, I'm going to play this move, queen to f5, because I'm trying to play either queen to h3 or queen to d5. And what this does, the whole idea, like if I'm able to get my queen to this g2 square, it's just going to be a checkmate. So that's the plan. He's going to be able to defend against it with f3 though. But once he plays f3, it's going to be a free pawn. I want you guys to also notice that playing f4 just completely kills his own bishop. Okay, queen goes back to f1. Queen on f1 makes things worse for him, actually. Well, not really. He's trying to prevent queen h3. Queen to d5 is winning, by the way. Pawn to pawn to f3 is the only move. But mm, let's just play queen to d5. Queen to d5 is winning. It's just the opposite colored bishops that I'm worried about. But I cannot be ahead by two pawns and not win the game. If pawn f3 we takes, queen takes, bishop takes, we'll be ahead by two pawns, very strong bishop, and we're playing against a very weak bishop. Haha, he played rook to e5. He thought his queen was already covering the g2 square. Doesn't cover the h1 square though, which means that's just checkmate. We're going to be beating more d4 against 900 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. Let's continue to beat some d4 opening. We're facing another London system. Let's play knight f6. Guys, everybody's going to play the London system. Oh, it's a Joe Bava London, which is also London. Once it's London, play knight f6, play pawn c5. That's the whole idea. On e3, what we need to do here is first we take on d4, and then we play pawn to a6, because it's the Joe Bava, it's not the regular London. And the Joe Bava London is like London with a bit more aggression, but it has some risk as well. Queen takes d4, I haven't really seen a lot because it allows me to develop my knight and gain some tempo on the queen. Well, not really tempo, since his bishop is able to go to b5 and pin my knight. And I'm assuming eventually he's just going to take on c6. But I'm just to force the issue. Let's play bishop to d7. Now his queen is really under attack. And once he moves the bishop more than once in the opening, we take. And just like that, we have the bishop here. It doesn't mean we're winning or anything, though. We just have the two bishops. He has the knight and the bishop. His king is now castled. Let's play pawn to e6. It's very important that we get our king out the center of the board as well. But because it's opposite side castles, it's definitely going to be a crazy, fun, exciting game where I'm good. Well, first I need to get my king out the center. Let's do that first. Knight to f3. Let's play bishop to e7. Usually I play bishop to d6, but this bishop may help me in the attack. So he plays pawn to h3. Let's get the king out the center of the board. And from here, I'm just looking to start, or I mean, h3, then h4, bro. That's just wasting time. Let's play queen to a5, connecting the rooks, applying some pressure to his a2 pawn already. He's also trying to attack my king, especially if he plays pawn to g4. That would be such a good move. Because if he plays g4 and I takes, there's rook to g1, hits the knight, and if I move the knight, I get mated. Well, not immediately, but it's dangerous. He didn't do it though. He played king to b1. Not a bad prophylactic move. Now I'm going to play the move pawn to b5. The plan is to play pawn to b4 and attack his knight. And basically, I want to just start marching my pawns up the board as well. So pawn h3, he's doing the same. He's doing the same. Let's play pawn to b4, hit the knight, force the knight to move. Bro, you didn't move the knight, bro. I attacked your knight. It's not like he attacked back something else. He just gave me the knight. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. Okay, he plays rook c3. He's attacking my bishop. But we just need to protect the bishop, to be honest. Like there's nothing much that is happening here. So let's just play rook AC8. I may need this rook to protect my king, especially since I'm seeing him playing pawn to h6 to continue with some attack. Pawn h6, that's a nice move. All right, he's down by a piece. We still have to be careful. Pawn to g6, there's bishop to g5. And if I move my knight, I'm mated. Pawn to g6, bishop g5. Maybe queen back to d8 at that point, and then I move my knight. It's kind of passive though, but it's the only thing that I'm seeing right now. Another thing I'm seeing is queen to b4. Just get the queens off the board. Queen b4, pawn takes is very strong though, and then after king takes, he's just not gonna wanna trade the queens. So how are we gonna do this? I think it's definitely pawn to g6. Bishop to g5. The guy played that so quickly. Let's pull the queen back to d8. We have to protect the knight. And then I'm going to pull the knight back to e8. So the knight prevents the mate, and then I'm going to try to trade. Knight to e5 in this position would be very aggressive. Queen takes a7. Um, Decent move, but I think he needed to focus on his attack. If knight e4, which hits the rook, he takes, hits the queen, and I could be losing some material. So let's play rook to c7 hits the queen, keeping my bishop guarded. And then once he moves his queen, I should be able to play knight e4. Unless he puts his queen on d4. If he puts his queen on d4, we can't play knight e4 because queen g7 is going to be mate. So if he puts his queen on d4, we pull the knight back to e8 because we still have to neutralize pieces that is on our half of the board. Queen a6 isn't too bad. I mean, that's two pieces on my bishop. I only have one. With that being said, let's pull the bishop back to b7, hit the queen. Like he's playing a lot of attacking move, but it doesn't really hold too much weight. Queen to b6 is also an attacking move, but this is basically just helping us to trade some pieces off the board. First, I'm going to take on c3 to trade the rooks, forcing him to trade the queens, and then we simply take back the queen. And I mean, I'm ahead by a piece. My goal is to trade. So he took with the pawn. I need to ensure that all my pieces are active. I would love to play knight e4, but if I play knight e4, I lose my bishop. So first I'm going to play king f8 to protect the bishop. Then I'm going to play knight e4. So he moves his king. Now we play knight e4. We're just trying to trade some pieces off the board. That's what you do when you're ahead in material. Okay, he traded. Let's take. And then he plays rook to b1. It's a good move. Let's go rook to d7 to guard the bishop. If knight to e5, there's rook to c7. I mean, both of these pawns are basically dead pawns, to be honest. I have a little idea of putting my bishop on a6, playing rook a7, and then taking on a2. Okay, he puts his rook back to d1. No, I think he's not sure what is happening anymore. That's a free pawn. That's a free pawn. But let's just play bishop a6. Not in any rush to take them. I'm trying to like find a way to get to his king first. So okay, he attacks my rook. Let's play rook. Okay, guys, I'm playing a bit too fast, and he's also playing very fast. Let me just calm down. Let me calm down because putting the rook on a7 actually blundered the rook with knight to c7, and because he's playing fast, he also missed it. So let's calm down. Let's play king to d6. This is counter-attacking his knight, by the way. So, okay, he took on f7. Let's take the knight, and then he's going to take my knight, and now I'll play bishop to c4, guarding the pawn. Let's slow down. It's funny. He actually has a lot of pawns. He has 7 pawns, and I only have 4. But position is just winning because 2 of those pawns are just double. Okay, so he took. Let's just take back with the pawn, assuming he wants to play e4. And okay, how do we do this? I could go here and take this, or I could go here and take this. Because if I take this, this will fall as well. And if he takes on d5, I don't want to take back with the bishop because pawn c4 wins the bishop. So let's first take on c2. These are the pawns that is going to help me to win the game. Then I'm going to take this with check, then take this, and eventually grab this pawn. I'm not going to take this though because pawn, well, well, guy played rook to b1. You played very well, bro. But that's just a checkmate. We beat more d4 against 1,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,000, and we're going to be beating some more D4 openings. I'm seeing knight C3, by the way. Maybe he wants to play some Jobava London. Let's just play knight to F6 here. Bishop to F4. We're seeing some Jobava London. Remember what we do against any form of Londons? We move our C pawn. All right, so pawn to E3 was played. Now we take on E3. Remember that we're trying to take on E3. And then once they take back on E3, then we need to deal with the threat of their knight going to B5. So now we play A6. So the Joe Bava London, knight to b5 is a real threat. And then from here, it's just going to be normal development. Like once you're able to get to this position, just develop. Develop the knight, develop the two bishops, get your king castled. A lot of person puts the bishop on d3. I mean, it looks like a nice square for the bishop. Bishop is actually better on e2. And the main theoretical move is to actually put the pawn on e5. But bishop to d3, we go bishop to g4. We're pinning this knight, which is the main defender of this pawn on d4, which means he is currently at risk of losing a pawn. And that's why you're going to see a lot of persons, like if they know that they're about to lose a pawn, they're going to pull the bishop back to e2 so that way the queen guards the pawn. But he still decides to play the move pawn h3. Maybe he's going to be like, let me attack his bishop. He knows that bishops are better than knights. Give up that bishop. Because once you give up that bishop and the queen takes, you play knight takes d4. And just like that, you've won a pawn. Right, so he moves his queen to e3, which is not the best square for the queen, by the way. I mean, my knight is under attack. Once I pull the knight back, we are seeing two pieces that are adjacent to each other. So even though he decides to castle his king, pawn to d4 seems to be a fork here. No, it's definitely risky because my queen is on the same line as his rook, so I have to think about it. Pawn to d4, if he moves the queen, I take the knight. Pawn to d4, if he decides to move the bishop, I'll still take the queen. And even though he's going to be taking my queen, I'll take his rook and I will be winning an entire rook from that exchange. So pawn to d4 is just a fork. And the opponent resigns. We're beating more d4 against 1100 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1100, and we're going to be beating some more pawn to d4. This guy's deciding to play the London system. Let's just play knight f6. This is how I like to play against the London. Oh, this is not the London, guys. This is the Joe Bava London. The good thing is you play against the London and the Joe Bava London very similarly. Like, we're always going to play this move pawn to c5. Like, once it's a London, whether Joe Bava or regular, we're going to play pawn c5. And then after e3, we take on e3. And usually they take back on e3. Now, what I want you guys to keep in mind is this move knight to b5 is a real threat. So if you play something like knight c6 now, you're going to get hit with knight b5, and that's going to be a fork. So you have to play this prophylactic move, pawn to a6, to prevent their knight from coming to b5. And then after knight to f3, then you play knight c6. Up to d3 was played, which is considered to be a slight mistake, by the way. So if you're going to be a Jobava player, the main moves in this position is to just put the knight on e5, which is a very strong square, or put your bishop on e2. And the reason why this is considered to be a mistake is because the moment I play the move bishop to g4, I am now pinning the knight to the queen. And you notice how quickly he plays h3. This guy's also playing a bit too fast. And that's why he's blundering like this. The knight is the only defender of the pawn on d4, which means once I get rid of the knight, which yes, I'm giving up my bishop for a knight, but it's a removing the guard tactic. The queen, well, I don't think he has to take with the queen, but if he takes with the pawn, it's the same free pawn, but he chose to take with the queen. So let's just take the free pawn on d4. We're also attacking his queen, which is forced to move. And he pulls his queen back to d1. The queen is now on the same line as my knight, just to stay safe from any weird looking bishop takes sacrifice. Let me just pull my knight back. Like, I'm up the pawn, I pull my knight back, and then from here I continue to develop. So he castled his king. Pawn to e5 is an interesting move, but because his king is out the center and my king is in the center, I'm not going to play e5 because he could sack his bishop, play rook e1. I may get in trouble. So I'm just going to play pawn e6 and then try to just get my king out the center of the board as quickly as possible. Pawn to a4 was played. I guess it's to prevent b5. I had no intentions of playing b5 right now. Goal was just to finish my development. So let's go bishop d6, especially since we're ahead by a pawn. The goal is also to trade. So you guys know that we're also going to be accepting all the trades. He doesn't want to accept the trades. He decided not to trade the bishop, but to lose the bishop. Now, you guys need to be aware of this pattern. Like whenever you see two pieces on adjacent sides to each other like that, you can get a lot of forking ideas. So, and my knight on c3 also covers this d4 square. So instead of castling, once I hit him with this move pawn to d4, I am now attacking both the knight and the bishop at the same time. So he decides to save the bishop, which means we're going to take the knight. And then once the bishop takes back, now is the perfect time to get to our king out the center of the board. Queen to f3 was played. I mean, he's trying to connect his rook, he's developing and everything. But my goal is just to trade as many pieces off the board, especially since he has two very weird looking bishops pointing towards my king. I was actually thinking about playing knight e5. But if I play knight e5 right now, eventually his queen is going to take this pawn for free. So instead, I'm going to play the move knight to d5. So that way, well, I'm still attacking this bishop, by the way, but the queen is no longer able to get to b7 if I decide to move my knight to e5. Queen to h5 was played, and that didn't really do anything, by the way. I mean, like, the whole idea in this position is to just trade the pieces off the board. And I'm already ahead by a piece, so we're just going to start trading. So let's just take this. You see, I tricked you guys. You thought I was going to fall for another meeting one. After what happened in that 1000 rank game, nah, I'm never going to be falling for any checkmates like that. Obviously, the queen and the bishop was pointing towards h7, and I had to play something like pawn to g6, which means now I'm attacking the queen and I'm attacking his bishop. He puts the queen on h6, which means he's still threatening a checkmate. But no, we take the bishop and we're doing fine. Anyways, pawn takes c3 was played. Let's just finish our development at this point. We haven't connected the rook, so let's just play queen to f6. And we're also moving the queen to a square where it attacks something. So that c3 pawn is basically dead. And the reason why it's dead is because if he tries to prevent it, then he's going to be losing his queen. So he basically didn't even try to defend the pawn, but he's still going to be losing his queen. So if you're able to see how I'm going to be winning the guy's queen, that's very nice. But if you notice, the queen doesn't really have a lot of squares to go. So once I hit him with this move, bishop to f4, queen is basically trapped. Like it has nowhere to go. The best he could do is to just sacrifice the queen for the bishop. I'll take the queen and I'll just be completely winning here. And the opponent resigns. We beat more d4 against 1200 level players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1200. Let's beat some more d4 openings. All right, we're seeing another London system. I mean, there's so many London systems in this. You guys really need to ensure that you know how to play against the London. What I recommend is after this universal knight f6 move, we play pawn to c5 to attack their center. You're not losing a pawn. You can always play e6 and then take, or just play queen a5 check and then take. So pawn c3, we play knight c6, just finishing our development. And then from here, the goal is to castle the king. We're not going to be developing our light squared bishop just yet. So we're going to play the move pawn to e6. And then after we play the move pawn to e6, we're going to be playing the move bishop to d6. Then we castle the king. Okay, we've seen an immediate knight to e5. This is one of those aggressive ways to play the London, but let's just continue with bishop to d6, regular stuff. Usually, if we castle, they try to play h4, g4, and start some attack. There's also bishop to b5 here, which applies a lot of pressure, but he's just taking too quickly. Like, imagine moving the knight one, two, three times just to take a piece that has only moved once. Okay, he pulls his bishop back to g3. Now we get the king out the center of the board. And thanks to him, by taking on c6 and forcing us to take back, it opens the b file, which means we're definitely going to be playing moves like rook to b8 to put our rook on the open file. So, I mean, his king is also in the center of the board, so I'm also thinking about opening the center. But let's play rook to b8 first, because at the end of the day, rooks needs files. I need to develop my light squared bishop. Can't put it here. So he plays queen to c2. Now we take on d4. And my plan from here is just to try to open the center as best as I can or as quickly as I can before he gets his king out the center. So he took with the e pawn. I was actually about to play pawn c5, and if I takes, bishop takes, there's actually bishop takes b8. So maybe I need to play pawn to e5. The question is, am I in time to play pawn to e5? All right. Let's just play rook to e8. Let's put the rook on the same line as the king. Oh, he castled queenside. That's bold. He castled queenside. And my rook is already pointing towards b2. That's bold. All right, change of plans. We're going to be attacking him on the queen side. Still not allowed to develop my bishop. Like, a part of me want to take and then get the chance to play c5, but if I takes, it opens the h file for his rook. So let me just play the move queen to c7. So that way, if I play c5 takes, I can at least take with the queen and just leave my bishop on d6. Okay, so now he decides to trade. Let's take back. I mean, he could say he gained some tempo there because I had to play queen c7 and then queen d6, but it makes the pawn breaks way easier for me now. Pawn h4, he's trying to attack me, so we're going to play pawn c5. The goal is to take and then open up the c file, so I think he needs to take. But then if he takes, queen takes, his f2 pawn is going to be under attack. So I really like my position. The only downside is this bishop, and I'm also thinking of protecting the a6 square. Let's say my queen guards a6, put the bishop on a6, get rid of my undeveloped piece and continue the attack. So knight f3. If I takes, there's knight takes. I'm gonna take though because it opens the c file. So now the plan is to have one rook on the b and one rook on the c. Knight takes d4. Do I play bishop d7 or bishop a6? I'm leaning more towards bishop a6 because even though his bishop is not yet developed, once it goes to d3 and points towards my king, it's going to be a bit more active than my bishop that's going to be sitting on d7. If he takes, I takes, and a2 is under attack. Otherwise, I'm just going to play rook to c8, put my rook on the same line as his queen and his king. Okay, pawn to h4. He's continuing with the attack. Pawn to h6. Let's just play pawn to h6, preventing that pawn from moving, and then the pawn becomes a bit of a weakness. His plan from here, though, is to get a pawn to g5 as quickly as possible. So maybe f3, g4, g5. I don't know. It's going to take him too long to do that, though. So bishop takes, expected. Let's take. Hit the unprotected pawn. Now I'm expecting the king to go to b1 to guard the pawn, and then we play rook to c1, and then all our pieces are just going to be active. Okay, so he found king to b1. Let's play rook to c8, activating this rook. Now I really have no bad pieces, especially if he allows me to play knight e4, maybe knight c5 to a4, getting my knight into the attack. Rook to c1. He's just trying to defend at this point. So now I'm just going to bring more pieces in the attack. First of all, knight to e4 is already a very strong move. Doesn't really attack f3, but it attacks c3 because pin pieces don't protect. So I'm currently threatening to take on c3. So wouldn't be surprised if he plays king to a1. And I mean, for 1200, he's playing very strong. I'm not going to lie. Okay, yo, rook to h3 is also nice. He protects the pawn with the rook. That's not bad at all. Okay, let's play knight c5 with the plan of playing knight a4 and then targeting the b2 pawn. We have to attack. Rook to g3, nice little rook lift idea, putting his rook on the same line as my king. Now I'm going to play knight to a4. So now b2 is under attack. He still has to be careful not to lose his c3 pawn. If I takes, rook takes, queen takes, and I have nothing. But he has to defend against b2 here. If he pushes the pawn, I'm still not able to sack, but I'm getting him to push pawns on the side that his king is on, so that's good. Maybe he needs to just pull the knight back to b3. That would be a very nice way to defend. Ooh, well, come on, bro. That wasn't really... I mean, it's... He moves the king out the way, but b2 was what I was attacking, bro. You're playing so well. I mean, I have to say this is over now, unless you're going to sack the queen. I'm going to play the move rook takes b2. Okay, there's no forward moves on this diagonal for the queen. So let's just take on b2. If he sack the queen, that's up to him. If he doesn't sack the queen, okay, let's say he pulls the queen back to, yeah, he's going to be getting checkmated. Very sad. Played very well, but he just missed that one move. The guy sacrificed the rook. Let's take that free rook though. Like, he just does not have enough pieces in the attack. That was very creative that he just did. If I take with the pawn, queen g6 check, and that could be perpetual check. Luckily, I'm able to take with the queen. His queen is still under attack, but he get the chance to take my knight. The thing is, though, he's already down by an entire rook, so it's already bad for him. Let's take this free pawn. No, Yeah, let's just take this free pawn. If he plays queen to d4 trying to check my king and attack my rook, I'll just play queen to f6, which attacks his queen, guard my rook, which is what he did. And if the goal is to trade the pieces off the board, then it's very good for me. He shouldn't want to trade, but this is just lost. So he puts the queen back on e3. But now I have a very nice move. Notice how my rook is on the same line as his rook. So because my plan is to trade, I'm going to push the pawn. And if he takes, I simply trade the rooks first, and then queen takes d4 is going to lead to a checkmate. If he doesn't take and move the queen, then my rook goes in. Okay, he checks, not bad. What I'm going to do is to put my king somewhere where I'm sure he has no more checks. Whenever you're under attack or whenever pieces are pointing towards your king or just in the middle game, ensure that the opponent has no possibility of checking your king. Okay, now that he got his king in the game like that, this is just checkmate in two moves. Like he literally put his king on b1 for me to checkmate him. Hopefully you found it, by the way. But once I play queen to b6 check, the king has nowhere else to go except a1, and then queen to b2 is going to be a checkmate. So let's give a check. King has to move, and that's just a checkmate. We're going to be beating more d4 openings against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300. Let's beat some more d4 openings. Knight f3. We're not sure if they're going to be playing the London or the Queen's Gambit, so let's just play knight to f6 here. Pawn to e3 blocks in the bishop, which means we may see a Coley system, but I'm still going to be playing the same thing. Like this can be played against like most of the lines that they play. On c3, knight goes to c6. Okay, bishop to b5 pins the knight very early. It doesn't really do anything too dangerous though. So let's just play e6 and continue with the plan. Bishop to d6, get the king out the center. Knight to d2, bishop to d6, and castle. That's our simple plan. On to h3, not sure why he did that. Let's just get the king out the center of the board. And then he got his king out the center of the board. So as we said, the plan is to play e5. Usually when this bishop is on b5 pointing towards the knight, it's a bit harder because there's a lot of removing the guard tactic that he could try. But let's just continue with the idea by playing queen e7. You know, we're just trying to ensure that we're at least fully developed. I may also play something like bishop d7 just to connect my rooks and then chase his bishop away. And if he wants to give up his bishop for a knight, that's on him. Rook e1, maybe he wants to play e4. Let's play bishop to d7. If he plays e4, I'll just take, and then after the rook takes, I play a6 and chase away the bishop. Yep, he did play e4. Let's just take, because otherwise he's threatening to fork. So let's just take. And then once he takes with the knight, he's threatening both c5, d6, f6. So let's just take again. And then I'm assuming he's going to take with the rook. And that's when I'm going to hit him with pawn a6. This is me following the principle of neutralization, by the way, just not allowing any piece on my half of the board. It would be bad for him to take because my bishop takes, it attacks the rook. My bishop is going to be on a nice diagonal. I think it's best for him to put his bishop on d3, pointing it towards this diagonal that my king is on. Instead, he pulls his bishop back to a4, and I'm just going to play b5 to continue attacking that bishop. And then eventually, I want to get my rooks in the game because all my minor pieces are currently developed, but my major pieces aren't really doing anything. So with that being said, let's just play the move rook to d8, putting my rook on the same line as the queen. Okay, he saw that and he did the right thing by getting his queen off the same line as my rook. Now I'm going to play rook to c8. Now all my pieces are active basically. So from here, I'm planning on starting my attack. Bishop to g5, that's a very nice move by the way, because I can't really move my queen because I'm going to lose my rook. So he's basically forcing me to push pawns on the side that my king is on, even though I get the chance to attack his bishop. Now, because my queen is on the same line as his rook, there's a lot of ideas of him playing pawn to d5. So I think I'm just going to take the pawn. And if knight takes, I just take. And if rook takes, you know, I can hit him with bishop to c5, hit the rook, and then the bishop goes to c6. And then both of my bishops could be active. So let's take on d4. Okay, pawn takes d4 I wasn't expecting. I still need to be aware of this move pawn to d5 because, you know, we know that people likes to apply pressure to pin pieces. Knight to b4 hits the bishop. If bishop to b3, knight d5 would not work because the bishop is going to take, so can't do that just yet. The thing is, though, I just have to get my queen off the same line as the rook. I mean, pawn to d5 is a huge threat. If he allows me to play knight b4, knight d5, then that would be good. I think here he needs to play bishop b3 and then rook to e1 and then just point all his pieces to attack my weak pawn on e6. And it looks like that's what he's doing. Let's play rook to e8 to add some defense. Now I have one, two, three pieces defending e6. He has one, two, three pieces attacking e6. Okay, he puts the rook on d1 and not e1. I was expecting him to try to apply some more pressure. Maybe he wants to play pawn to d5, and then if I takes, bishop takes, and then my queen is pinned because the bishop is on the same line as my queen and my king. So definitely need to watch out for that bishop. But I have two plans here. Knight a4 hits the bishop, or knight b4 controls the d5 square. Hit the bishop, bishop back to c2, maybe knight c4, but eventually he's going to chase the knight away. So let's put the knight on b4, preventing d5. And even if he plays a3 to chase away my knight, I'll just still put the knight on d5. Now I'm basically blocking the bishop. And this is a good way to at least compare a knight to a bishop. If you're able to centralize your knight, then it's a very nice way to compare your knight to a bishop. Queen to d2. He really wants to play pawn to d5. What if I play bishop c6? Because moving the queen, that's one less attacker on e6. So bishop c6, he's not going to be able to take on e6. Two attackers, two defenders. Bishop to c6, pawn push obviously will just never work because I'm just going to take. So let's just play bishop to c6 first since it's an attacking move. And he has to be careful of me playing moves like bishop takes f3. For example, it all depends on where he puts his rook. All I know, he's not able to put his rook on e3 because the rook and the queen will be on the same line, which is what he did. Okay, I got ahead of myself. So what I saw was bishop f4. But if I play bishop f4, pinning the rook to the queen, there's queen takes b4. And then once I take his rook and then he takes my bishop, I lose a bishop and a knight, which is 6 points, and all I gain is a rook. So we're not going to do that. Let's just pull the knight back to d5 first, preventing d5, hitting the rook. Bishop f4 is still a threat. If he gives up this bishop for this knight, it's going to be perfect for me because my bishop is going to be on a very nice diagonal. But then he puts his rook on e1. Now the rook and the queen is on the same diagonal and it's on a light dark square. So all I need to do is now just hit him with bishop to b4. Hit the queen, hit the rook. Queen has to move, grab the rook. And just like that, we won an exchange. All right, so he moves the queen out of the way. Let's just grab that queen. And then once he takes back, let's say with the rook, taking with the rook is that's the most natural move. I'm going to hit him with queen to g6 because now I'm putting my queen on the same line as his king, which means knight f4 is just a very nice little threat. So, I mean, pulling the bishop back to g3, defend against it though. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely defending against it. I'm looking for some ways to maybe trade a few pieces off the board. Like my pieces are doing not too bad here. My pawn on e6 is definitely the weakest pawn though. But yeah, I definitely just want to trade some pieces off the board. Let me just play rook to d8, putting my rook on this file instead of this file. So that way, if I have to move away my knight, which I do not intend to, then this pawn becomes weak. So rook c1. How do we trade some pieces off the board? Okay, my bishop is under attack. Let's pull it back. Yeah, let's take care of these one by one. Knight h4 hits the queen. All right, let's pull the queen back to f7. He's playing some aggressive move. I'm thinking of rook back to c8, but he's probably gonna move the rook again. It's like I'm trying to find different ways to trade pieces off the board. Maybe knight b4, and if pawn a3, bishop d5, and then just trade the bishops off. Yeah, that's definitely a plan. Okay, king to f1 is kind of weird. He immediately puts his king and his queen on the same line, and I'm automatically looking for ways to get my bishop on this diagonal. But let's see. Knight b4. There's rook c7. Yeah, it's kind of a reckless move. I want to go knight b4 though, so let's play rook to d7 first, just to ensure that my seventh rank is being guarded. Like the goal is to trade, but I'm not necessarily trying to rush it too much because I'm just winning here. Sometimes when you're winning, you should just enjoy your advantage. You don't have to end the game. Just keep improving the pieces. Okay. He puts the king back on g1. I'm just going to assume that he doesn't know what he's doing. Let's go knight b4. Luckily, His d4 pawn is unprotected. I was expecting a3, and a3 now leaves the bishop unprotected, and that's why bishop to d5 becomes a possibility. Because now if he takes the free knight, I take his free bishop, and if he takes my bishop, I take with the knight, and that's one less piece off the board. So he did trade. Let's take back. Rook c5 doesn't really do much. Let's play rook to d8, doubling up my rook on this d4 pawn. So that way, the moment I move my knight out of the way, I have two attackers versus his 0 defenders. And I'm assuming he's going to pull the knight back to f3 and guard. But then I'm going to hit him with knight f5. Okay, rook e6 makes some sense. He's trying to take here. What if I play knight e7? Nah, that's not going to work. Okay, that was not a bad move. I have to defend against that. Let's play rook to e8. Notice what I'm doing? He has a dark squared bishop. I'm staying off the dark squares. So now that he takes on e6, that was very nice, by the way. All right, I think I'm going to play b4 because the queen is also attacking my pawn. If he takes, my knight takes, and then d4 will be under attack. Knight went back to f3. Let's take on a3. Maybe he's going to play pawn takes. Who knows? And then I may play knight c3, hit the queen. But this is not going to be the easiest game to convert. I'm going to try. If he plays pawn takes, rook to a7 is actually a very nice move. Because if he doesn't trade, I win the pawn. He took with the rook, though. Still going to play rook to a7, just to see if he's trying to trade. And if he plays rook b3, I play rook b7 to see if he's trying to trade. Okay, we saw some trades. Very good. That's one less piece off the board, by the way. Queen c4. Okay. Now I'm going to play a very... Actually, isn't that a pawn? Like the pawn is unprotected. What if I check the king and hit the unprotected pawn? King h2, I take. What attacking move is he going to play? Let's say queen c6 hits the unprotected rook. At that point, I play rook e7. Bishop d6 is another attacking move, though. Yeah, that seems to be a bit risky. Takes, queen c6. This is under attack. This is under attack. It's a bit risky. Let's play king to f7 first. So that way, if he plays queen c6, then my pieces are not going to be under attack. Knight d2. Where's the knight headed? I'm not really sure. No, we play queen a1. Check the king, hit the unprotected pawn, grab the pawn next move. He has no checks, and queen c6 is not an attacking move. You see, sometimes the threat is better than the execution. Sometimes it's best to be patient because now once I take on b2, his knight is now unprotected, so he has to move the knight. All right, knight e4. Oh, that was his idea. That's a very strong move. Okay, he's trying to fork. He's trying to fork. I'm going to try something very nice to convert the game. Let's play rook to d8. If he plays knight d6, because I'm currently ahead by 2 points, all the pawns are basically on the same side, so it's going to be hard for me to try to win these pawns. So if he plays knight d6 and I sack my rook, then queen takes would have been a nice move. Instead, he plays knight c5, which is also a very nice move. And now I need to be aware of any little ideas that he may have on my e6 pawn. Okay, for now, his queen has no check, so let's play h5. h4, not now, but it's an idea. Maybe g5, h4. It's a bit reckless, though. Don't want to be pushing too much pawns on the side that my king is on. Knight back to d3. Okay, my queen is now under attack. We have to move the queen. Let me just pull the queen back to b7 to keep everything guarded. You also don't have a lot of time on the clock. Rook to c8 is an idea, but he's now trading pieces off the board. We're obviously going to be accepting all the trades. Bishop takes, now we play queen d5 because we want all the trades. If he checks, that's bad because I block the check, take the pawn next move. He moves the queen. Now I have two attackers versus his one defender, so let's take the free pawn. Also attacking his unprotected bishop. So he is trading. Now I have the exchange and the extra pawn, which means even if I sacrifice my rook, 4 pawns versus 3 pawns has to be an immediate win. And there's other ways to win this, but you guys know I like to show you guys some endgame stuff. This is called simplification. This is called conversion. Now we get the king in the game. So king up, we play king up. Pawn g3, not bad. Let's get the king as active as possible. And now I'm going to try to get my pawn to g4. Once my pawn gets to g4, his king is not going to be able to go to f3, and that's the idea of playing king to d3. This is called outflanking. Now his king has to go away, step from the pawn, then I'll take the pawn. It's 4v2 now. So this is now just completely winning. Yup, let's just grab the pawn. Now we're just going to take all the pawns and then just roll the pawns up the board. rolling the pawns up the board. That's what we're doing. Rolling all the pawns up the board. Okay, let's take another pawn. Keep rolling. All right, this is now a queen. He's not resigning. Let's get another queen. And he resigns. We beat more d4 against 1400 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1400. Let's continue to beat some d4. Okay, immediate knight f3. Maybe he's going to be playing the London. Maybe he's going to transpose it into a queen's gambit. We're not sure. So let's just play the move knight f6. Knight f6 is like a universal move, but it seems to be a Catalan opening that we're going to be playing against. And again, we're still going to play pawn to e6 here. We don't really care if they play pawn to c4, and we also don't care if we block out the bishop. Like, we know the plan with the bishop anyway. So bishop to g2, let's go bishop to e7. The plan is to castle. He decides to castle his king. We also decide to castle our king. So in this position, I'm very safe. The main Catalan move here is pawn to c4, but instead he decides to play the move knight to e5. So from here, it's just a matter of, okay, my king side has already been developed. I have already decided to castle my king. What should I do now? All I'm going to do is develop my queenside pieces. I mean, pawn c5 is definitely a move, but let's just focus on our development here. I don't want to play knight c6 because after takes, my pawns are doubled. So let's just play knight to d7, and the knight usually always go to d7 anyways. And then he plays the move knight to d2 because he wants to play knight to f3 and then really hold on to this knight on the e5 square. But I've noticed a lot of persons don't like to take these types of knight on e5 because they're basically saying, okay, if I take, he takes, he attacks my knight has to move. But it's actually fine, bro. Like, it's a very good pawn structure that you have. You just need to pull your knight back to d7, and you're also attacking that pawn on e5. Now, after this move knight to f3 was played, I definitely need to ensure that I finish my development. So now I'm going to play the move pawn to b6. The plan is to play bishop to b7, or maybe even bishop to a6, and eventually I'm going to play pawn to c5. So pawn to b3 was played. He's trying to finish his development. He's also trying to ensure that he does not lose that pawn. Let me finish my development as well. And keep in mind, my bishop is pointing towards my own pawn, by the way. So it's not the best bishop in the world, but it's not a terrible bishop. Bishop to b2, he's just keeping his pawn guarded. Now let's play pawn c5, just to get good control over the center. I may also want to play queen c7 to apply pressure to e5. He played pawn a4 with the idea of playing pawn to a5, so that's not bad. Let's play queen c7 here, which means our rooks are connected. Remember, the goal is to ensure that you connect your rooks. Pawn to e3. All right, pawn to e3. Again, it's these types of positions where you guys go wrong. The opponent didn't really threaten anything. You can't really threaten anything. What should you do? Find a piece that is not doing anything and let it do something. Even if it's a move like rook to d8, yes, I put my queen on the same line, but I still have my rook pointing towards my own pawn, which means it's not the most active rook in the world, but at least it's towards the center of the board. Anytime one of these pawns push and I take, my rook will now be on an open file. So he also plays queen to d3 to connect his rooks. And now I'm going to play rook to c8, just doing the same thing. Another thing I want you guys to keep in mind that I do a lot is I try to move a new piece each time. So now that I've successfully moved all my pieces, now I can start moving the same pieces more than once in the opening. Okay, rook to d1 was played. I have a little plan of playing bishop f8, pawn g6, bishop g7 with the whole idea of trying to win this pawn. I'm also thinking of just playing pawn to c4 here and attack the queen, like pawn c4, queen goes back to e2, maybe pawn c3 hits the bishop, and then he has to pull the bishop back to a weird square, and then he may still lose this pawn on e5. So let's go ahead and play pawn to c4. I want you guys to notice when I start to move my pawn, it's when all my pieces are fully developed. Once you fully develop your pieces, then you can start moving your pawns. If you move your pawn before your pieces are developed, it's some premature attacking business you're going for. He took, look what happens once I take back. Rook is now active. You see, that's why I swing my rooks towards the center of the board, even though they didn't really look as if they were super active. Okay, queen to c3, very nice move. That's three pieces guarding e5, and I'm also not able to play something like knight c5 because I am not trying to lose my pawn on c4. So I'm just gonna play the move Pawn a5, there's bishop a3. But I'm still going to play pawn to a5 in this position because I notice if I'm able to get my bishop to this b4 square, his queen is not going to have nowhere to go. Um, mm, okay, he decides to play the move rook to d4. I guess that's two attackers on my c4 pawn, but I already have two defenders on the c4 pawn, bro. So the purpose of a4 was to defend the b4 square. Once I hit him real hard with bishop to b4, he's basically forced to sacrifice the rook. He didn't really sack the queen, but he sacked the rook because he's basically forced to say, okay, even though you're guarding c4 twice and I'm only attacking it twice, I'm still going to take on c4. So once I take his queen and he takes back my queen, I'm just going to take his rook and we're going to be ahead by a whole entire rook. So let's just grab the rook. It's now GG's from here. That's an unprotected pawn. I'm ahead in material, so I'm also trying to trade as many pieces off the board. Bishop to d4 was played. Okay, okay. Remember, we're trying to trade, guys. Let's pull the bishop back to c5. I'm just trying to offer up a bishop trade here. And then he played rook to d1, which is fine. And now I'm just going to trade. I want to trade. Like, my rook is attacking both of the pawns, so those are dead pawns anyways. So I'm just focusing on trading here. Again, bishops are better than knights, right? But we don't care. We're still going to trade it because we're ahead by an entire rook. We're just trying to simplify the game. Okay, bishop takes was played. Now I'm just going to take this free pawn on c2 because we still want to ensure that we're attacking the opponent's weak pawns in the endgame. Okay, that's it's probably a slip. I don't know why he would play. Well, he resigns. We're going to be beating more d4 against 1500 players. Stick around. Your opponent is now 1500. Let's beat up some more d4 openings. And for this one, they play knight f3. Let's just play knight to f6 because we're not sure if we're going to see Queen's Gambit or London system or even Catalan opening. So we're seeing the Queen's Gambit. And let's just play the move pawn to c6 here. And this is not the Queen's Gambit decline, by the way. This is like the Slav defense. And then after knight to c3, I'm just going to play e6, just maintaining this little triangle. It's very, very easy. And then we're just going to finish our development and castle. Okay, bishop to g5 was played. Usually, if the bishop is on g5, pinning your knight to your queen, just play bishop to e7 so that way you don't have to worry about your knight being pinned. And then it's going to be very easy for you to get your king out the center of the board. We're definitely going to be playing a move like h6, chasing that bishop out of our half of the board. So he plays h3. He plays e3. Let's first get our king out the center. Now we're seeing the move bishop to d3. Now, what have I been saying about this move bishop to d3 or even bishop to e2? It's like once they move the bishop, that's usually when I like to take on c4 because I'm basically forcing them to move the same piece more than once in the opening, which is wasting time. And after bishop takes, I play the move knight to d7 just to finish my development. Now, yes, I know the bishop on c8, it's not a good bishop. And you guys are probably wondering, okay, e5 is pretty much not even possible anymore because the bishop is on e7. And I don't want to waste time putting the bishop on d6, then playing queen e7, then playing e5. So there's a number of approaches to this. For one, I could go knight to d5. And if I play knight to d5 and he takes my bishop and I take back with the queen, eventually I'm going to be able to play pawn to e5. And if I play knight to d5 and they take, then I could also take his bishop. But there's also this move pawn to b5 that I want to introduce you guys to, where the goal is actually to just fianchet to the bishop, but we're just choosing to put the pawn on b5 instead of b6 because it's more aggressive. We're now forcing him to move the bishop another time because remember, the bishop goes to d3, then to c4, and now it has to go back again. And then the whole idea is to put the bishop on b7, and eventually, in the future, when it is safe, you move the pawn to c5, and then all of a sudden, this bishop is going to be on a very nice diagonal. So the bishop goes back to d3. Let's play bishop to b7. For now, the bishop is still bad. By the way, we need to play pawn to c5 in order for this bishop to be a good bishop. Pawn to e4 is a very good move. This is usually the right way how to react to people who is trying to play c5, by the way, because once he manages to play e5 and I play knight d5, he's going to be able to take, and then my bishop is actually still going to be bad. So that's a very nice move. So let's start by playing the move pawn to h6 first. Let's just get that bishop out of our half of the board. Maybe he's going to give up his bishop for a knight. Who knows? All right, so the bishop went back to e3. And I'm actually really trying to play this move pawn c5 before he plays pawn to e5. Now, what I'm noticing is if I dare to touch this pawn right now, I'm going to be losing this pawn. So I'm thinking about either moving the pawn to b4 first and attack his knight, or playing a6, then play pawn c5. The thing is, though, if I play pawn to, let's say I play pawn to b4, there's knight a4. And okay, then I may play pawn to c5. Because if he decides to take on c5, then I should be able to take on e4. It's very tricky though, because he could still play pawn e5. I could also play a6 followed by c5, but I just think if I play a6, he plays e5. And by the way, I'm not losing. If I play a6 and he plays e5 and I play knight d5, we're still trying to play c5. And if they take, we're just gonna take back with the c pawn. It makes the bishop worse, but now we could play moves like a5, b4, and then put the bishop on this diagonal. I'm going to choose to play pawn to b4 though. I think pawn to b4 is a better way to fight to get our bishop in the game. Because if knight a4, I can also play pawn to a4, a5, and then bishop a6. And then what I'm basically doing is I'm exchanging my bad bishop for his good bishop. Okay, so the knight went back to e2. I was actually expecting knight a4 to try to cover the c5 square, but this is the whole idea, guys. Now once we play pawn to c5, didn't lose the b pawn, our light squared bishop becomes a good piece. And we're not afraid of e5, by the way, because if e5 we have this move knight d5 hits the bishop, or we could also play knight to g4 hits the bishop, because I may want to keep the idea of playing bishop takes f3 to expose his king alive. Now queen to c2 was played. Weird looking move for sure, because he's putting his queen on the C file, and I can always put a rook on the C file. So automatically I'm thinking about, what if I just take the pawn and then just play rook to C8, hitting the queen? He's going to be forced to move the queen, and that's a tempo on the queen. I could play rook to C8 first, but taking on D4 is a bit more forcing. And I'm basically trying to do a removing the guard tactic. Like, I'm attacking e4 twice, he's guarding e4 twice. So once I hit him with rook to c8, he kind of has to pull the queen all the way back to b1 if he wants to keep his pawn on e4 guarded. Okay, so knight takes was played. Now we play rook to c8, swinging the rook in the game with tempo on the queen. So the queen now has to move. Queen to b3 was played, which means the queen didn't stay guarding the pawn on e4, which means that's a free pawn. Not only is that just a free pawn, why rush? Okay, I was about to say the threat is better than the execution, and I was going to hit him with knight c5, hit the queen, hit the bishop. But if knight c5, there's queen b4, and literally anywhere I move my knight, even if I take the bishop, he's going to take my bishop. And I'm not really seeing exactly what I get from that. So let's just take the free pawn. Let's not try to be too fancy. Okay, I think I actually needed to take with the bishop and not the knight, because what I just realized is his queen is actually on the same line as my king. And because his queen is on the same line as my king, there's this little idea where he plays bishop takes e4, and if I'm not careful and just randomly take back the bishop, he plays knight takes e6, forking my queen and my rook. And if I take back, he plays queen takes e6, which checks. And because my bishop is going to be on e4, he's going to be able to take on e4. But if he takes on e4, I'm not going to take back. That's when I'm going to hit him with knight c5, which it's the queen, guard e6, and then I'm going to take back on e4. So he plays the move rook to d1. Makes sense. His rook is on the same line as my queen. Still want to play this move knight c5, by the way. But if knight c5, queen takes b4, knight takes d3, there is queen takes b7, and I just don't see what I gain from that. Maybe rook b1, but that's nothing. What if I play queen to a5 though? Like, queen to a5 guards the pawn. Nah, I don't think. I mean, I definitely need to move my queen off the same line as that rook though. All right, I need to be a bit careful here. Let's play bishop to d5 first. Let's go bishop to d5. So even though my queen is on the same line as his rook, it kind of has to pass through my bishop first. And I don't think I'm going to be moving my bishop from the d5 square anyways. I'm also attacking the queen. I don't really see where he's going to be putting his queen, to be honest. Like, it's not trapped, but okay, he has to play queen to a4. And then after he plays queen to a4, that's when we hit him with knight c5. Well, it's still very tricky. I'm trying to see if I'm able to trap the queen. If knight c5, that's just a free pawn, I'm assuming. Rook to a8. Queen can't go here, 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 or here, which means if I play knight c5 and he takes this pawn, rook to a8 traps the queen. If I play knight c5 and he takes this pawn, my bishop is no longer here, so I'm going to take on d3. The queen is going to be on the same line as my bishop, and he's going to lose the game. So knight c5 is just a very nice move. Maybe now he has to play queen to c2, but the thing is, he's going to be putting his queen on the same line as my rook, so we're going to be he's going to be getting there's going to be some discovered attacking possibilities. Okay, so he did take on a7, and as we discussed, just the simple rook to a8 is just trapping the queen. There's just nowhere for the queen to go that is safe. And the opponent resigns. We beat more d4 against 1600 level players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1600. We're going to be beating more d4, specifically Queen's Gambit, this London system. Remember, against the London, we go knight f6, c5, then we play knight c6, so that way our queen could get access to b6. But we're not going to play the queen b6 idea here. We're just going to play pawn to e6, bishop to d6, castle the king, and then just play some regular chess from there. So knight to f3. Let's go bishop to d6. The plan from here is just to get the king out the center of the board. Knight e5 is usually some aggressive move, and then after castle h4, g4, and then start some attack. But let's see what white plays. Okay, immediate bishop takes d6. Let's just take back. Now it should be way easier for me to play pawn to e5, which means my light squared bishop is now going to be able to get developed. So knight d2, before we open the center, let's get our king out the center. And then once he got his king out the center, now I'm right in time to play pawn to e5. So the plan from here is just to play the move bishop to g4, pin the knight. If he trades everything, play knight f3 to hit my queen, then play pawn to h3. Then I'm just going to play b6 and bishop b7. Okay, so he took, let's take back. Usually from here, they trade everything and play knight f3. It's a very good way to play, by the way. Okay, we're seeing someone who didn't take, but he pulls the bishop back to c2, which means now I'm able to go bishop to g4, pin the knight to the queen, which I'm already applying pressure to. But I'm not necessarily going to gain much, because even if I take the knight, he's just going to take with the knight, and he's fine. So let's just pull the bishop back to h5 since the pawn attacked it, and maintain the spin on the knight. From here, we're not going to really have much to do, so I'm just going to play rook to e8 followed by rook to d8. Okay, so queen to e2 was played. Not bad. Knight to e4 is an idea. Knight e4, bishop e4, pawn e4, knight e4. Knight takes f3 with check, pawn f3, queen g3 check. That's too much drama though. Let's just play rook to e8. Let's just put the rook on the same line as the queen. I'm assuming he's going to do the same thing and play rook to d1, and I'm just going to play rook to d8. Oh, bishop to d1. That was the actual idea. That's not bad. That's not bad. He's really trying to take care of this spin that is happening. I also like the idea of just playing pawn to d4 because if takes, 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 it opens my rook pointing towards his queen. There's also knight to e4 because if takes, there's this spin. There's so much happening here. If knight e4, let's say queen e1, knight takes. Knight e4 seems a bit too slow. Let's play. Okay, this is tricky. But I'm gonna go for it. Let's go with knight e4. If pawn d4, there's pawn to g4 that I have to keep in mind. Eventually, I'm gonna swing my least active rook in the game, but I think I have a little attack going on here. He's definitely not gonna take. Queen to e1 is what he needs to find, so that way the bishop protects the knight. Oh, it's actually tricky because if queen e1, knight d3 hits the queen, and then if queen e2, knight takes b2, and I'm winning a pawn. So it's actually very, very tricky here. He may have to play pawn to g4, which is pushing pawns on the side that his king is on. And, nobody wants to do that. Queen to b5. That's definitely a move. Queen to b5. Okay, so if I takes, knight takes, he's safe. If I takes, knight takes, he's safe. So let's just play the move pawn to a6, hit the queen. Queen takes b7 is not possible due to rook to b8, and then the queen is going to be trapped. So he still has to find some good squares for the queen. I mean, let's just say queen to b3. Yeah, I think he needs to play queen to b3. So he did find queen to b3. And the question is, how do we continue here? If I take with the bishop, he takes with the knight. Wait. Yes, yes, yes. Look at this. Look at this. I'm trying to set up a fork, right? Like if I have a knight on d2, that's going to be a fork. So if I take with the bishop, obviously if he takes with the pawn, he loses the knight. So I takes with the bishop. If he takes with the bishop, he loses the knight. I take with the bishop. If knight takes, I first take the knight with check, which means nothing is covering d2. And then after bishop takes, then we go knight e2, and that's a fork. At this point, I think queen to d5 is going to be very strong, but I'm just going to trade the queens. After bishop takes, we take the rook, and we should be able to win the game with an exchange up. So, what did I say I was going to play again? Bishop takes? Yeah, I think it's bishop takes. Okay, so knight takes f3. Now we play knight takes f3 check. Bishop now has to take. Knight d2 becomes a fork. And then queen takes, maybe even queen takes, well, queen takes b7. Yeah, maybe even queen takes b7 because rook b1 doesn't trap the queen. So he took on d5. If I take the bishop first, then, queen takes is going to be played. So let's first trade. And then once the bishop takes, we take on f1. And we are now ahead by an exchange. Okay, king takes was played. What's the most active way to do this? I'm only ahead by 1 point. Rook d1, bishop takes, rook b8, bishop takes, rook b2. And at that point, the threat is to put two rooks on the seventh, which is almost impossible to defend against. So let's go with that. So rook to d8, hit the bishop. And these types of ideas, it's very important that you guys see these types of ideas. Okay, he plays pawn e4, so he's not trying to take this pawn, which is correct. He shouldn't allow my rooks to be active. Okay, with that being said, let's just play rook to d7 to guard the pawn, and then I'm going to try to use the time to get my king in the game. It's going to be harder to play since he didn't take the pawn. Pawn c4. Whoa, that bishop is cemented on the d5 square. Let's play king to f8. Just get the king off the light square. So, we don't want to face any little discovered attacking ideas. Then I'm going to try to find somewhere for this rook. Maybe d8, maybe c8, who knows. Rook to e1. Maybe he wants to roll this pawn. Let's just play rook to d8 to get the rook off of this diagonal. Again, it's not the easiest game to win because his bishop is actually that's actually the most active a bishop can be. And in order for my rooks to be active, I need open lines, which is why I'm going to play this move, pawn b5. It's very important that I do some pawn breaks to open lines for my pieces, which means my rook was probably better on b5 because once I take pawn takes, rook to b2 becomes the idea. So let's take, and then after pawn takes, put the rook back on b8, which is probably wasting some time, but this is good enough. Rook to e2 is not a bad move, just trying to prevent my rook from getting to his second rank. Okay, and then from here, I have a very nice plan. It's going to take some time though, but pawn to a4, pawn to a3, push the pawn all the way up the board, and then play rook to b2. That's my plan. Oh, pawn to a4 was played. Okay, let's play rook to b4. Let's attack the weak pawns. If bishop to c6 hit the rook, then this rook is now active. So he plays rook to a1. And now I need to ensure that I'm able to activate my king. So I'm going to play pawn to g5, which will make it harder for him to play pawn to f4. And then I'm going to try to play moves like f6. Because if I can able to run my king up in this direction, that would be good. Especially if I'm able to play h5, h4. Like if I get all my pawns on dark squares like this, then my king is going to be able to advance. So that's my next little mini plan. Okay, so he's getting his king in the game. Uh, okay, let's get my king in the game as well. The plan is to play king up, but I mean, pawn to e5 wouldn't be a bad move here to prevent me from playing king up. Pawn g3, king up, pawn f4 is also strong. King to g3, we play king to f6. Pawn to f4 is an idea. He plays king up. Maybe he wants to play pawn push. If king up, he takes. So let's play, if h6, there's king up though. All right, let's pull this rook back. I need this rook to be a bit more active. Thing is, now I can't play king up because I lose this pawn. He doesn't really have any time on the clock though, so he's gonna lose this game. He pulled his rook back. Let's actually play king to g6 with the idea of playing pawn to h5 and just chase away the king. Okay, pawn to h4. How do we do this? Check king back. Let's just take actually. I don't want my pawn to become like a weakness in the future. Let's go king back to f6. And there's also rook to g8. So pawn to g4, king e5. If bishop takes, I just go rook f8 and then take. So he moves his king. Now I'm going to play rook to b2 with some ideas of setting up some little checkmating ideas. And again, if bishop takes, there's rook over, followed by takes. All right, so he pulls the king back. Let's play king to f4, threatening a checkmate, attacking this unprotected pawn. He defended the pawn, but that's just checkmate. We're going to be beating more d4 against 1,700 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,700. And we're going to be beating more d4 by simply playing pawn to d5. And when they play pawn to c4, I'm going to play the move pawn to c6. This is the Slav defense, by the way. I'm basically just supporting the center with pawn to c6. And most importantly, I am moving my c pawn. If you play against d4, you must move your c pawn. Now he plays pawn to e3 because if I take, the bishop is going to take. From here, I'm just going to continue with my development. Let's go knight to f6. Usually in these types of scenarios, we're trying to develop our kingside pieces as quickly as possible. Okay, so knight to c3 was played, and there is this bishop to f5 move, but if you're gonna play bishop to f5 move, you must be on the lookout for this move queen to b3, and I don't like when they play queen to b3, so I'm just gonna play the move pawn to e6. Now, there's actually a difference between the Slav defense and the semi-Slav defense, but if you guys just remember this little pawn triangle here, you should just be fine. Knight to f3 was played, and after knight f3, I could choose to play bishop to d6, or I could choose to play bishop e7. Now, personally, I'm not really sure where I'm going to put that bishop just yet, but I know for a fact that this knight can't go to the c6 square anymore, and I'm not going to put it on the edge of the board. So the knight usually goes to d7, and again, by now you should have some ideas of how we deal with this bad light squared bishop. There's so many different ways to deal with it, but I'm just gonna see which one of them is more beneficial for me. So bishop e2 was played. Because he moves the bishop, I think it's now my perfect opportunity to take on c4. Usually you don't take on c4 until they move the bishop, because if you take when they don't move the bishop, then you don't gain the tempo. But because they move the bishop to e2, then you take on c4, you basically force them to move the same piece more than once. From here, though, let me just finish my development first. Bishop to d6. I'm also going to get my king out the center of the board, and he plays pawn h3. I guess he's trying to be careful about his h2 square, but personally, I don't think that was necessary. Let's just get the king out the center of the board. And then he plays pawn to a4. Pawn to a4 is preventing the whole idea of playing pawn to b5 and bishop to b7. And if he's preventing that idea, how are we going to get our bishop out? There's also pawn to b6, followed by bishop to b7, followed by pawn to c5, and then all of a sudden your bishop is going to be on this nice diagonal. But there's also pawn to e5. So I'm going to play queen to e7 first to support myself in playing this move pawn to e5. And then once the opponent makes their move, now I play pawn to e5. So as you guys notice, it's kind of like something that could happen in like the Coley system, where we choose to block in the bishop knowing that eventually we're going to do a pawn break to get this bishop out, or we're going to fianchet to the bishop, and even though the bishop still points towards the pawn, we're going to move the pawn forward. Okay, so he took on e5, we're going to take back on e5, hit the bishop, hit the knight, and then once the knight takes on e5, we're going to play queen takes. Now, we're threatening a little cheap checkmate. We're playing against someone who's 1700. They're not going to be falling for the checkmate. But deep down, what I want to happen is I want to get him to move the pawns in front of his king. Like, if you can force someone to push the pawns in front of their king, they're basically weakening their king. So, for example, if he plays pawn to g3, he blunders this pawn, which means he has to play pawn to f4. But then if he plays pawn to f4, he's weakening this pawn. I'm just going to pull my queen back, but weaknesses never go away. What? Okay, I wasn't expecting that move, bro. I mean, pawn to f4 was fine. Rook to e, I mean, it's interesting because if I check king over, check king up, and then take this pawn, then I'm going to be losing my bishop. But I'm definitely going to check, because once I check king over, for one, there's some sacrificial ideas that I may not play. But two, I can always just play rook to d8 and just put my rook on the same line as the queen, and then it's just going to get weird. I think you should have played f4, bro, but let's just check the king on h2. The king is now going to be forced to move to f1, and I don't think there's anything he could do in the future, not now, because my bishop is going to be hanging, but I don't think there's anything that he could do in the future to prevent queen to h1 followed by queen takes g2. Actually, I think there is. I think he's able to play queen to f3 which is such a nice move. So, for example, let's say I play bishop to f5 here just to develop. He plays queen f3, and then if I check, there's king up. But I have something for him. Let's finish our development. Let's just finish our development. If queen f3, my bishop is under attack, I'm going to be forced to pull it back. I'm thinking about some bishop to h5 ideas. Like his king is not safe, and I'm going to check him on h1 when it works. If I check him now, he's just going to play king up. So I thought I was going to win the pawn. I'm not going to win the pawn if he finds queen f3, which he did. So let's just pull the bishop back to g6 for now. And I'm thinking about playing bishop to h5 to hit the queen. Bishop h5, though, there's pawn to g4, and then I'm not going to be able to check on h1. So maybe not bishop h5. Maybe I'm just gonna get all my pieces in the game and not worry too much about the fact that I have a little attack on this king. Okay, so now he plays knight to e2. Knight to e2, which means anytime I check the king, he blocks with the knight. There are bishop to g1 ideas though, which is just very strong because it applies pressure to the pinned knight. And how is he gonna defend at that point? Maybe king to e2, but then I take the free knight. And then at that point, I guess he's going to move this bishop. And then when he moves the bishop, my queen is going to kind of be pinned and trapped. It's going to be weird. So I'm not going to choose that line. Okay, so I knew I told you guys that I wanted to get my rooks in the game, which is still correct. But didn't he just blunder? Like his knight on c3 was covering the e4 square, right? And it's no longer guarding the e4 square. So I think this is a drawback mistake that he just made, or even a drawback blunder. Because what if I hit him with bishop to e4? Isn't this a free queen? Like queen can't go here, can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. Yeah, the queen is just trapped. I almost missed it, by the way. Bishop to e4 is just GG. Not only is his queen trapped, but even if there was a magical square for him to put his queen, queen takes g2 would have been a checkmate. And the opponent resigns. We're beating more d4 against 1800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1800. Let's beat up some more d4. All right, so we're seeing a Queen's Gambit. Let's play the Slav defense, not the Queen's Gambit decline. I actually have a Queen's Gambit decline video, by the way, so you'll find it if you look for it. And then after knight to f3, we'll play knight to f6, just regular setup. But we are seeing Catalan opening. That's very interesting. Now, against the Catalan, it's actually not too bad to get the bishop on f5 because it's going to make it hard for him to play moves like rook to b1 and advance. But we have to be on the lookout for a queen coming to b3. If the queen comes to b3, b7 is going to be under attack. Just keep that in mind. Now, there's this move I'm going to play pawn to h6, and that's before playing pawn to e6. And that's because I don't want him to play knight to a4 and hit my bishop. If he decides to play knight a4 and hit my bishop, I'm just going to hide it on h7, and everything is going to be fine. It also makes it harder for them to play e4. So he decides to castle his king. Now I'm going to play the move knight to d7. Still could have played pawn to e6, but I just want to ensure that I'm fully prepared if he decides to play queen b3. Because remember, if you put your bishop on f5, it leaves b7 unprotected. And because they play c4, you need to be ready for a queen going to b3. All right, so he plays pawn to b3, which means there's not going to be any queen going to b3. So let's just play pawn to e6 here and develop normally. Where to put my dark squared bishop? I'm actually not sure if it goes to d6 or e7. I really don't think it matters that much. What I'm sure of though is he may want to put his knight on e5. So I'm going to put the bishop on d6 to have some control over e5. So that way, after something like knight e5, I could maybe play queen c7 and, it's just applying more pressure to his knight. So pawn to e3, he didn't go for that. I mean, the guy's just trying to get all his pieces active, to be honest. He's also not trying to lose the pawn on c4. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. And this is very, very typical development, by the way, guys. Very typical. All my minor pieces are developed. My king is castled. Queen to e7, connect my rooks. What more simple could it be? It's just chess from here. Now it's just about me not blundering my pieces. Okay, rook to e1 was played. Now it's time to make progress. How do we make progress from here? We want to bring our major pieces in the game, like our rooks. But we also need to know when it comes to bringing major pieces in the game, we need to think about pawn breaks. So I'm really thinking about playing this move pawn to e5, but I have to be careful about it. Because if I take on c4, he may play pawn to e4 and attack my bishop. And then once the bishop moves, pawn to e5 is a fork. So I don't think it is safe right now for me to go for the pawn break. So Let me use that time to play something like rook to d8, just getting my rook on the same line as his queen, because we still need to improve the activity of our rooks. Maybe I'm going to play rook to d8 next, and then maybe I'm just going to play pawn c5, or I'm going to take and then play pawn c5. I just can't take now due to pawn e4. Rook to c1, the guy's also ensuring that he has all his pieces in the game. I'm going to do the same. Let's go rook to c8. Now, I've successfully moved all my pieces, which is good. I moved my queen, I castled my king, my rooks are connected, all my minor pieces are developed. I've checked all the box. Now it's time to start making the pawn moves. He played pawn to c4. I was kind of expecting, or maybe you could say waiting on him to play that move. It's not really a good move because now it's easier for me to play e5. Because before I was worried about playing e5 and then losing this pawn. But now once he plays pawn to c5, hitting my bishop, I'm not sure where to put the bishop though, to be honest. Like I'm gonna put it on c7 though, because at least maybe I could put it on. Well, he played b4. So I guess his plan is to play b5 and start some attack. If anytime he plays b5 and then take, my rook gets the file. With that being said, I'm now gonna play the move pawn to e4. If takes, takes, knight takes, takes, and I just have a very nice position. The thing is, I think this rook on d8 now belongs on e8, which is pretty funny. If he doesn't take, I am also considering just moving my pawn to e4 and attacking the knight. But let's see. Very interesting. Very interesting. So basically, he did not take to improve my knight. And he's basically saying if I decides to take, then he takes back, and then my queen is under attack. So I actually can't take. So with that being said, I'm going to play the move rook to e8, putting my rook on the same line as his rook. So that way, in some positions, I could take stakes and then consider sacrifice. Well, not necessarily sacrificing, but just taking his rook. And it could be a trade. Pawn to a4, okay. He wants to play pawn to b5. I think he should have just played pawn to b5 in one move, to be honest. I'm still trying to think about how exactly I'm going to be improving my position. Like, I could takes, takes, and then takes, queen takes, and then takes. But then after he plays rook takes, I really did not get anything from that. So I'm just trying to find something slight, just a slight improvement. Maybe knight f8, eventually try to put my knight on e6 at the end of the line. So that way his d4 pawn becomes a weakness. Or maybe I could just play pawn to h5 here with the idea of playing pawn to h4 and just start to try to get him to push some pawns on the side that his king is on. So I'm currently threatening to play h4, and obviously he's not going to take because it exposes his king. And I may play h3 to attack his bishop or even just take on g3. This is like, it's a very positional game. There's nothing that is happening immediately. And I want you guys to notice how I'm choosing not to take his pawn because if I take his pawn, it helps his rook. And he's choosing not to take my pawn because if he takes my pawn, it helps my knight or my bishop. We both know that to take is a mistake. And this is why whenever you're seeing a higher rated player playing chess, we maintain the tension. We don't just trade the first opportunity that we get. So now he plays pawn b5. I don't want to take because it helps him. If he takes, I take back, and my rook could get the file. So I'm going to play pawn to h4 to apply some pressure to his king side, not expecting him to take. If he does take, it's going to surprise me. But I may want to play h3 and attack that bishop, or maybe just play pawn g6, king g7, rook h8, and then start some attack on his king. Who knows? So he took, let's take. Now that the b file is open, I'm now going to play rook to b1, and my rook is going to get the open file. Now, what did I lose? My pawn on c6 is actually a very weak pawn. Because he played a4, it's not really easy for him to get to that pawn. I think he needed to just play queen up, pawn to e4. Okay, pawn to e4, I was not expecting at all. Wasn't expecting him to play pawn to e4. All right, let's calculate. The pawn no longer guards this pawn. What if I take on d4 instead? If I take on d4, he takes a bishop. I'm ahead by a pawn. I take the rook, he takes, I takes, rook takes, and then I take. Once I takes, I'm still ahead by a pawn. And if he takes my pawn, then at that point his pawn on c5 is going to be hanging, and then my knight is going to take. Okay, which means if I take, that's just a nice move. Yeah, let's take on d4. I think pawn to e4 was a bit too ambitious for him. So I'm currently down by a piece, but I'm going to get back the piece. So let's just take, and then after queen takes, I takes, and then after rook takes, I takes, and I got back the piece. Now, at the end of the variation, he's forced to play bishop takes. Once he plays bishop takes, what we saw was this pawn being unprotected. Now, Okay, I'm not sure if I should take the pawn like this, because if I take the pawn like this, he may want to take on f6. And then once he takes on f6, he's doubling up my pawn. So let's be a bit patient about it first, because that's a very weak pawn. Um, let's take on g3 first. Position is still equal. All right. If I take on, oh, he took with the f pawn. Interesting. All right. Now, if I take bishop takes, I have what is called connected pass pawns, and I'm ahead by a pawn. Rook is going to go to e7, so rook is going to be on my 7th rank. At that point, I hit him with bishop to b6, put my bishop on the same line as his king. And then once he moves the king, maybe I may play king f8 to hit the rook or rook c7. Pawn is a pawn at the end of the day. We're taking that pawn and we're doubling up our pawns. So, okay, he played pawn to a5. He doesn't want to give up his bishop. Interesting. Well, I don't want any double pawns anymore, right? I could now just move my knight. Just not sure where it belongs. Maybe just put the knight on d7, keeping everything guarded. That should be fine. And now I'm just playing with an extra piece. Yes, the rook has access to my 7th rank, but if he plays rook to e7 now, I'm just going to play king to f8, and then I'm just going to be attacking that rook. Okay, rook to b1 was played. He puts his rook on the open file. Um, it should not hurt me to put my rook on the file as well. I'm the one who is ahead by a pawn, so I'm trying to trade as many pieces off the board. Plus, his pawn on a5 is also overexerted, so you can see me winning that pawn, or I'm seeing myself winning that pawn. Okay, knight to f3. The knight no longer covers this e4 square. The bishop also no longer covers e4. So let's go knight e4, hit the bishop. This pawn is also overexerted, and now that he puts the bishop on b2, this pawn is no longer guarded. So we're not going to play bishop to c7, attacking the weak pawn. And you guys should know, like, once we're in the endgame, the goal becomes attacking the weak pawns. Okay, he played knight to d4, very strong move, counter-attacking my pawn. If I take his pawn, he takes my pawn. But what you guys learned about endgame is if you're on the winning side, you don't necessarily want to be trading the pawns. It's best if you try to win them. So let's play the move pawn to c5 and attack his knight. And this is also helping me to start rolling my pass pawn up the board. I have connected pass pawns as well, so it's just not going to be an easy game for him. Knight goes down to c6, which means, okay, he guarded his pawn. He's also attacking my pawn. Very strong move. All right, let's just play pawn to... Oh, he's also threatening this. Okay, that was a very nice move then. Let's play king to f8 to prevent knight e7 check. If he takes on a7, I take on a5. I don't want to trade the pawns, but that was like one of those cases where it was forced because he was also threatening to fort my pawns here. Now, okay, he took. Let's take back. Okay, it's not opposite colored bishop, so that's good. He moves his king, and now my plan is just to roll the pawn up the board. So this is a nice move pawn to c4 because not only am I threatening to play pawn c3 just rolling the pawn, his knight is unprotected and his king and his knight is on the same line. So what if I play bishop to b6 check? Oh, if I play bishop b6 check, the bishop blocks. I don't win anything. What if I hit him with pawn to c3 first? There's no bishop block. No, oh no, but he has a check. Oh God, he has a check. That was actually a check. Which means after he check and I move the king, okay, he did not check. So let's just hit him with bishop to b6. If he had check, I would have moved the king, then he took the pawn. But poor guy, this should just be winning now. King to d3 makes it way harder than it needs to be because, okay, how am I going to do this? Check, king takes, hit the pawn. Let's play bishop to g1. I'm definitely gonna lose this pawn, so I'm trying to win one of his pawns. So he pushes the pawn. I'm sure he wants to push it again. Now I'm gonna play bishop to h2. Look how I'm gonna trick him now. Look how I'm gonna trick him now. If he takes, then I take. But if he pushes the pawn to g4, my bishop comes back to e5, and I'm protecting my pawn on c3. So he decided to take. Let's take. I now only have 58 seconds on the clock, so we have to be fast, but it shouldn't be hard for us to play this endgame. The plan is just to attack weak pawns, push past pawns, activate the king. My king is the piece that needs urgent activation right now, so pawn to a4. Let's play king to g8. It's very important that I try not to trade too much of the pawns off the board. And that's exactly what he's going for. Let's play king to h7, which means it's basically harder for him to play h6. And okay, what to do with my knight? Not sure. Let's play knight back to b8. I'm trying to find a way to just maybe get my knight on d6 and check his king, but I have to do it very quickly. Okay, that was also a nice move with the king. My knight is kind of out of place. I need to get it around in the game. Oh my God, that's a good move. Let's try. Let's try this. Let's put the bishop here and then here. Because if I can manage to trade the bishops, then I'm winning the game. And his bishop is also preventing my king from going forward. So here, then king up wins the game. Maybe he's gonna try to trap my knight though. So maybe knight c7 to e8. King up, bishop back. King over, bishop back. Yeah. And then he can't trade. So he has to move his bishop. And then I pull my knight back. I'm just not sure if I'm getting my knight trapped. That's the thing. Well, I'm not going to rush it. I'm just going to put my knight somewhere. Okay, king back makes it way easier for me then. Let's just play bishop h5. Once the bishop goes to g5, I'm chilling. Because now my knight is just not getting chopped anymore. So bishop to g5. Obviously, if he trades the bishop, I'm winning. So he has to move the bishop. Now I play king h6. And he saw that he's able to play king to g4. But from here, I'm just going to get my knight in the game. If I'm able to get my knight on e5, checking his king, he has to step his king away from the pawn, and then I'm going to take the pawn. I still only have 16 seconds on the clock. Now the plan is to win this pawn. So knight h6 followed by knight takes f5 will win the pawn. We have to start playing very fast. Okay, bishop here would have been winning. He's just not going to trade. All right, now I'm just going to start pre-moving. The time is running out. Check, maybe pre-move king here. Pre-move pushing the pawn. Can't trade. That was bad, bro. You can't trade. Like, this literally makes it so easy for me. Now I'm just pre-moving everything up the board. You just can't trade, bro. Yeah, it's definitely bad to trade. King up, push, push. Now that's just a queen. That's another queen. And then from here, it's just a lot of checkmate. Checkmate. With like 1 or 2 seconds left, we beat more d4 against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. Let's beat some more. d4 opening. All right, we're now facing a London system. Immediate bishop to f4, we go knight to f6. Pawn to e3, we play pawn c5. We've seen this a lot. And then after pawn c3, we play knight to c6. So the plan from here is to just play e6, so bishop to d3. There's also queen to b6, which is like another way to play against the London. But I think this way is actually way easier for you guys because it follows principles. Like knight f3, we go bishop to d6. The plan is just to get the king out the center of the board. Okay, so he pulls the bishop back to g3, which is one of the normal moves. There's also knight e5. Let's just use the time to get our king out the center of the board. And from here, for example, knight to d2, now we play queen e7. And the plan from here is just to play pawn to e5, by the way. So I'm basically trying to play pawn e5 so that way I'm able to develop my bishop. Remember, we spoke a lot about this light squared bishop. Whenever you play against pawn to d4, a lot of times you're going to have some bad light squared bishop. But now that he castle is king, we have enough pieces covering the e5 square if you do the count. So pawn to e5 here is just a good move. And I'm threatening to fork, so he had to take. Now let's just take back. And usually people trade everything and then play knight f3 to attack the queen. But this is one of those positions where black just has no weaknesses. That's the thing. And then after this, it's very easy to find somewhere for my bishop. Okay, he traded. Let's just take. I'm expecting knight f3 to hit the queen. So there's queen e7 and there's queen h5. Queen h5, there's bishop e2, bishop to g4, there's pawn h3. So let's just pull the queen back to e7. Maybe I'm going to go bishop g4, pin the knight, and then just use the time to get my rooks on the file, which is why he played h3. Very nice move, by the way. From here, let's go rook to e8. Let's put one rook on the file. The plan from here is maybe to play pawn b6, bishop to b7, and then put the other rook on the file. Or I may actually play bishop d7, then bishop c6, then put the rook on the file. So I basically fianchetto the bishop without having to play b6, basically. So rook c1, it's very likely that he wants to play pawn to c4 though. So I'm actually gonna play b6 because once he plays c4 and then he takes, my pawn on c5 is gonna be under attack. So actually, it's just this move bishop b5 that I'm a bit worried about to attack my bishop, but I don't think it holds too much weight. So rook e1 was played. Let's play bishop b7. Bishop is on a nice diagonal. This is not considered to be a bad bishop, by the way, even though it's pointing towards my own pawn, because it's flexible. Like I can always play pawn to d4 in the future. Okay, queen to c2 was played, pointing towards my h7 pawn. Doesn't do a lot though. I'm going to play pawn a6 here to ensure that there's no ideas of him playing bishop to b5. And then I may play rook to d8 to get my last piece in the game. I'm also thinking about just playing b5 and just push my queenside pawns up the board. There's also knight e4 here as well. There's a lot of moves that I have. I also want you guys to notice that I'm not necessarily planning 5, 6 moves ahead. It's more like some 3 move ahead and some 2 to 3 moves ahead plans. Okay, knight went back to d2. He has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces potentially covering e4. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces already covering e4, which means in playing pawn to e4 is still not something that I am worrying about. So let's just continue with the plan. Rooks, bring the rooks towards the center of the board. Maybe he plays pawn to c4, but pawn c4, even if I decide to take, it just gives my bishop this very nice diagonal. Okay, and that's why he plays pawn to f3, because he really wants to play pawn to e4. All right, how are we going to do this? The queen is on the same line as the rook, so let's play queen c7 first and foremost. I'm also targeting the g3 square, which is, it's not the biggest deal, but g3 is a bit weak. Now, if he plays pawn e4, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces covering that square. He's going to have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces covering the square. I could play pawn to c4 here myself, though. Like, what if I play c4, chase away the bishop, which is one of the main defenders, then I take? Still not going to be winning anything, though. That's the thing. So push bishop back, takes knight takes, takes pawn takes, but he's gonna have the most ugliest, terrible pawn structure. So we're gonna be going for that idea. So pawn to c4 hits the bishop. There's no in between moves, by the way, because if e5 I could take, but that's not what I'm gonna do. If e5 I just take the bishop, hit the queen. So this is kind of like a removing the guard tactic, but I don't gain material. I give him a very weak pawn, and once he has this weak isolated pawn on e4, then I'm gonna just start ganging up on it with all my pieces. So bishop f1 we take. I did not see the fact that I am leaving c4 vulnerable here. But the good thing is if he takes, I take. So I think he has to take back. So my pawn on c4 is not going to be in any danger at all. Okay, he just decides to take back with the pawn. Fear no. All right, so he has 2 pieces attacking c4. Let's play b5, guarding c4. 1, 2, 3 attackers versus 1, 2, 3 defenders, which means my plan from here is just to apply more attack to this pawn on e4. Okay, very interesting. He moves his king to h1. It's on the same line as my bishop though, so things could go wrong with that move. But let's continue with the plan. We need to apply more pressure to this pawn. Queen to f4 is that move. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces attacking the pawn. He has 1, 2, 3 pieces guarding the pawn. So I'm currently threatening to just win a pawn, and I'm really not seeing exactly how he's going to be able to add additional defense to that pawn. Okay, we saw rook e2. Maybe he wants to play rook e1. If I take with the knight, he take with the knight. I take with the rook because I'm trying to trade. And if he takes with his rook, I take and I hit the queen. Yeah, knight takes c4 is just a free pawn. His pieces are just not coordinated. I'm also threatening to fork on g3, so he has to trade this way. Okay. Wait. What if I play bishop takes? But then the queen has nowhere to go, but then he's going to play rook over. So bishop takes, he plays rook over. I can't take the queen because I'm mated. Ah, he got away. So let's just play rook takes. That was nice. So now if he takes, I'll just take with the bishop and then hit the queen. The good thing is, if he decides to take and I take, I'm attacking the queen. The queen has to keep this rook guarded, which is not entirely possible. Okay, rook to d1. Do I take or do I play rook e1? I think I'm going to take, actually. I think it's best to take, right? Hmm. Nah, to take is a mistake, though. Yeah, to take is a mistake. Let's just play rook to e8. Yeah, let him do the taking. If it's a case where we have to trade every single piece off the board, I'm ahead by a pawn though, so I'm gonna win the endgame. So rook takes was played. Let's play. Hmm. No, it's tricky. Takes. Nah, let's play rook takes. Because bishop takes, it's gonna be pinned anyways. Ha! We tricked now. Did we trick him? I thought I tricked him. I thought I'm able to take here with check. But after he plays king up and I takes, queen takes, nothing changed. So let's just play bishop takes, hit the queen, hit the bishop. And I mean, black just has so much more space than white here. He moves the queen. He is threatening some little checkmating trick. So let's play h5, not to get back rank. Anytime he checks, I'm just going to play king to h7. And then my plan from here is just to get my pieces further. For example, queen e3 threatens this check. Bishop to e2. Now I'm going to play the move queen e3 because he's now not able to take on h5, by the way, because his pawn on g2 is pinned and pinned pieces don't protect. So if he takes on h5, I take on h3 with check. King has to move and that's going to be a checkmate. So I think he has to move his king here or something. So he did move the king. Now I play h4. Now I'm threatening to play queen to g3, followed by mate again. So maybe he has to pull his bishop back to f1. And if I check, he plays king g1. Okay, I wasn't expecting to see bishop f3. That's a bad move, bro. You shouldn't be trading. Wait, takes. Yeah, you shouldn't be trading. Like, once I'm ahead by a pawn, it should just be a confirmed win. Like, I shouldn't even think about it for too long, especially since his king is not able to come up. Now I just need to activate my king. It's harder for him to activate his king. So king up push, king up, king. Okay, let's just play king up here. This is completely winning. So he pushed the pawn, we play king up. King over, we play king up, and then now he plays king up. The thing is, though, we are ahead by a pawn, so we're going to be using the fox in the chicken coop technique to win. Let's play pawn to f6, and basically how it works is we're going to be using what's happening over here as distraction, and then once his king has to focus over here, we're going to run our king over here. So let's play pawn g5. He has to take. Now I take, and the plan from here is just to play pawn to g4, and he's going to be in zugzwang. He's also forced to move his king. By the way, if he push, that's definitely a free pawn. So now that he moves his king, I'm going to roll this pawn up the board. And if he takes, I takes, that's just a pass pawn that his king has to go and stop. And once his king tries to prevent my pawn from queening, I use the time to run my king to the other side. That's one way to win. Another way to win is just by stalemating the game and forcing them to push their pawn and then just take the pawn and queening. So I'm assuming that should work as well. Let's see. Let's push the pawn. He moves the king. Let's play king here. And if he plays king h1, yeah, I think it's winning once I stalemate the game because the king can't move. He has to sack his pawns. If he push, I takes. If he push, I takes. If he push, I push. If he push, I push. And that's going to be made. So let's actually stalemate the game in quotation. Now he just has to start giving up the pawn. And if he push, we don't take with this pawn. That's going to be stalemate. We have to take with this pawn. So this pawn is able to roll. And once I push, he has to push the pawn. And that's just checkmate. Beat more d4 against 2000 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2000. Let's finish off with a bang. Beating more d4. Okay, pawn c4, queen's gambit. Let's play pawn c6, the Slav defense. Knight f3, we play knight f6, just developing our kingside pieces, and we're seeing a Catalan opening. Now, against the Catalan, if you play the Slav defense, just continue to develop your bishop. You don't necessarily want to have this bishop being bad against the Catalan. Like, if you have a bad light squared bishop versus the Catalan, you will lose the game. So bishop g2, we play h6. Remember the purpose of h6 is to hide the bishop on h7. So he castles the king. Now let's go knight to d7. And the plan is to play pawn to e6. Rook to e1, which means eventually pawn e4 may happen. Let's go pawn e6. And I'm just trying to finish my development from here. Knight c3. There's no pawn to e4 just yet. I guess he's going to want to pull his knight back to d2, then play pawn to e4. But that's fine. Let's just go bishop e7 and castle the king. Like the goal is not to try to find anything just yet. It's just to ensure that our development is complete and it's just to ensure that we do it quickly. Okay, he plays bishop to f4. He's still trying to finish his development. Let's get the king out the center of the board. And as you guys could see, it took me 9 moves to get all my minor pieces off the back rank and get my king castle. So if you're at like move 15 and you still have minor pieces on the back rank, or your king is still in the center of the board, you definitely did something wrong. All right, so pawn takes d5 was played. That's a fair move. Let's just play e takes d5 so that way in the future, once I play rook to e8, my rook is going to get the open file. There's always this queen to b3 move that I'm looking out for. Like, I just have to be careful. Maybe he's going to play something like rook to c1, putting his rook on the file. No, he played knight to e5, which is a nice move. I mean, he moves the knight forward. If I takes, he has many options to take back. And, eventually he wants to play pawn to e4. But it doesn't really attack much right now. Everything that it is attacking is guarded. So I'm just going to play the move rook to e8, putting my rook on this open file. Okay, he's doing the same. Rook goes to c1. And I'm thinking about different ways to connect my rooks here. Putting my queen on the same line as his bishop is a no-no. So queen to b6 is an idea, attacking the unprotected pawn. If queen b6, like the chances of him just playing knight a4 hits my queen, guard the pawn is very high. There is queen a5, which could work. Uh, but let me just be patient about what's happening. Let's just play bishop to f8. Let's just move the bishop out the way. So we apply more pressure to that knight. Maybe pawn to g5 is an idea to hit the bishop. And if the bishop move, we take the knight. So it's going to be forcing him to trade his very strong knight on e5 for my knight on d7. And then once I take, he pulls the bishop back, just an idea. It's very risky moving a pawn on the side that my king is on. But okay, we've seen pawn to a3, which means he definitely wants to play pawn to b4 and pawn to b5 to start a minority attack. And I'm trying to prevent this. I'm thinking about just playing pawn to a5. Okay, let's look on g5 again. g5 takes, queen takes, let's say bishop d2. Yeah, let's play g5. g5 is more forcing. It prevents b4 anyways. I may play pawn to a5 as a very nice... Okay, he took. The question is, how do I take back? And I think the answer is with the knight, so that way the bishop doesn't get this e5 square. Now his bishop has to go back, which is nice. Once the bishop goes back though, like what if he plays bishop d2 and then I hit him with queen b6? Is that a fork? Yo, aren't I attacking two unprotected? Like, aren't these two pawns unprotected? So when I play queen to b6, because pulling the bishop back to d2, the queen no longer guards the d4 pawn. So now if I play queen b6, I don't care if he plays knight a4 anymore. I'm just going to take this free pawn. So the question is, how is he going to defend both of his pawns at the same time? Let's pawn to e4. The guy says offense is the best defense. Okay, my bishop is under attack. Definitely going to just take on e4. It doesn't change the fact that d4 and b4 is still under attack. It doesn't matter what he plays. Maybe knight takes. If not, okay, bishop takes was played. Okay. So my bishop is still unprotected. So let's take. And then what is he going to play now? Knight takes. The good thing is, if he plays knight takes and I takes, I hit the knight and I still hit this pawn. There's no knight f6, by the way, because my knight on d7 guards f6. So that's very nice. So knight takes e4. If bishop takes, what if he plays bishop c3 though? If bishop c3, we first trade the queens, and then after he plays rook takes, my knight is going to be under attack. And then if I move the knight, that check could cost me the game. Okay, what if I take on? If I take on b2, there's rook b1, then take on d4, bishop c3, then I take. Okay, takes, rook over takes, rook takes b2. No, there's no rook takes b2. So if I take on b2, rook b1, and then I take, he has to defend the knight. So I'm actually going to choose to take the b2 pawn. No, wait. If I take on b2, rook b1, take on d4, rook b7 hits the knight. So I take the knight, he takes my knight. I think I'm going to be ahead by a pawn there. Oh no, the queen is there. Well, it's weird. Takes, takes, then he takes. So my queen is going to be here and his rook is going to be here. Do I like that position? I'm going to be ahead by a pawn, but do I like it? I think my opponent found like the absolute best way to defend. That was really cool. Rook takes, maybe queen h5. Nah, shouldn't work. Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. So let's take on b2 here. So it's a very risky position, but if I'm not going to lose the game and I'm going to be ahead by a pawn, then it should be enough for me to try to convert and win. The same h6 g5 thing that I did, it kind of give me a weak king. But if rook b1, I just take. Okay, immediately playing bishop to c3, I was not expecting. I was not expecting that at all. Hmm. Okay, that's another pawn though. Like, what if I take another pawn? What dangers am I in? Queen h5 doesn't really do much. Maybe queen g4 hits the unprotected knight. Queen g4 hits the unprotected knight. Let's say rook to d8 guards the unprotected knight. And then there's moves like f4. Whoa. Okay, I don't think I want to take that pawn. I'm already ahead by a pawn. I think it's more important that I try to get my queen in the defense. So let's play queen a2. Maybe he wants to play pawn to d5 as well to activate his bishop. So if pawn to d5, queen d5 takes, knight has to move, and that should be winning. So the plan is just to sit my queen on the d5 square, hit the knight, defend for a few moves, bring him into the endgame, win with the extra pawn. Okay, queen h5, that was definitely one of the move I was expecting. All right, that's guarded by the bishop. Maybe he wants to sack. Don't care. Queen to d5 hits the knight. Knight f6 I takes. There's no good forward move, so queen to d5 is always the plan. Just trying to neutralize that knight. If he pulls the knight back, then that's good. Like once his knight no longer controls f6, then my knight gets control over f6, and it's gonna force his queen to just move. So I'm confident here. Like black is now just winning. Plus the guy does not have enough time on the clock. Oh, pawn to f3 guards the knight. What if I just force the issue? Let's say we hit the knight, right? Kick the knight. He's definitely not going to move the knight forward, like for sure. I mean, who cares if he sack? I block with the bishop. Can't go here. Can't go here. Can't go here. And this is what you guys need to do, by the way. This is why you guys blunder. Like you need to see how the opponent's pieces are able to move forward. By the way, what I did not see just now was the fact that by moving my pawn from f7 to f5 leaves the g6 square unprotected, which means his queen is able to check. The good thing is if it's queen check, then I block with the bishop. And even if the knight check, I take, which he did. So let's block. And then if the knight, well, the knight is now no longer able to check. So still has to move his queen. I'm not going to lie. The guy could get his queen trapped. But I don't think he's going to get his queen trapped. I may just play here. All right, we didn't see that move. We didn't see that move. Let's lock in. What did he see? First of all, if I take the knight, I lose my rook. With that being said, we have to first take the rook with check, then we take the knight. Issue is, nah, there's no issue. Just take the knight. It's free. Yeah, let's just take the knight. Like if I don't take that knight, it's gonna checkmate me. The best way to refute a sack is to accept it. Oh, that was actually very nice. I should have actually played knight to f8 and attack the queen. That's what I needed to do. I did not see rook to e7 at all. Damn, I'm actually gonna get checkmated here. Yo, that's crazy. Should have played knight f8, man. I got too confident. I can't even sack my queen because the bishop is there. Okay, guys, there's literally nothing I could do to prevent a checkmate here, so I have to resign. Ouch. Please subscribe.